for being here, both council members and folks calling in. And we are streaming. I just got a notification, streaming live on YouTube as well. So welcome to folks coming in that way. I'm going to do a quick call to order. Doug, are you going to do the call to order?
Sure, I'll do a roll call, see who we have. Do we have Chair Gordon? As you drink. Vice Chair Michael Flatt.
Here.
Secretary Blumenfeld.
Present.
Nicole Capritz.
Here.
Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Here.
Deputy Secretary Hansen.
Here.
Assistant Secretary Soulier.
Here.
Secretary Kim.
Here.
And I don't believe we have Secretary Ross, but we do have a quorum.
Perfect. That's really helpful. And if you don't mind, either Fabia or Doug, whoever's monitoring this, as we get council members, will you just remind them to keep their video on and put their name of their agency in their name? That would be great. All right, we're gonna do first a little bit of housekeeping before we get to the minutes approval. So Sandra, to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Gordon, and thanks to everyone for joining us today, whether you're online or on the phone using the Zoom webinar platform, or if you're tuning in on YouTube where the meeting is live streaming. I'm here to provide some information to help guide us all through the processes for the remote meeting, which we've designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you'll not be able to unmute your microphone or your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform doesn't enable video for attendees, so we won't be able to see you. We'll hear your voice, though, if you are making a public comment. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. First point is if you're using the online Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function, which you'll see along the bottom of your screen. With several members of the SGC team will be monitoring throughout the meeting. If you've joined by phone and you have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. And if you don't have access to email, you may text or call 916-634-3359. There will be multiple opportunities for people to make public comments throughout this meeting, and we welcome hearing from you. If you're going to do that, you must be joining the meeting through Zoom, either through the webinar option or the phone. Visit sgcca.gov and complete the public comment form linked there to sign up for public comment. You'll need to complete a separate form for each item on which you wish to speak today, and you may complete a form at any time during the meeting. When Chair Gordon opens up the public comment period for your item, I'll read through the names of everybody who submitted a public comment form for that item. When you hear your name on the list, please raise your hand. You do this in Zoom using the raise hand button or under the participants menu. And if you're on the phone, you raise your hand by pressing *9. When it's your turn to speak, we'll unmute your microphone. If you're online, you'll see a window pop up alerting you that the host has unmuted you. You'll need to click the option to approve unmute. After that, just begin to speak. And if you're on the phone, you'll hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted, and then just begin to speak after that. Each speaker today will have a maximum of 3 minutes to make their remarks. If you're online, you'll see a timer pop up on your screen, so please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. And whether you're online or on the phone, Chair Gordon will notify you when your time is up. After that, we'll remute your microphone and you won't need to take any additional action. Finally, if you're unable to complete the online public comment form but would like to make a public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. And then this last item is for members of the council. To notify Chair Gordon that you'd like to enter a discussion, simply use the raise hand function in Zoom and she will call on you. And after you speak, please click the button to lower your hand so that she can track that you've already spoken. And that's all the housekeeping for today. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We'll go to council member updates in a minute. I wanted to just say that We often do 2 minutes per comment. We decided to do 3 minutes per comment today because there are a lot of folks who have written in and are commenting on particular aspects of the draft guidelines that we'll be discussing. And we really, really want to make sure that we have a robust discussion and a lot of public engagement on those issues. And so we expanded the number of minutes. Also, just an FYI, this was sent out through multiple channels, and Louise Besworth will talk about it much more robustly, but I wanted to just remind everyone on the council that we're not actually voting on the guidelines today, that today is a discussion of the guidelines for various reasons, but in part because we wanted to really have a more robust discussion of some of the comments that have come in. So just a reminder to folks on the call, and Louise will talk more about that in her report. I'm going to go to, and I guess the last housekeeping thing is I'm going to emphasize what Sandra said about council members raising their hand and through the Zoom function. The reason for that is I can't always see everybody, and you could be madly waving and I won't see it. So if you don't mind using that kind of function, that would be great. I'm going to use my prerogative as chair at the beginning of the council member updates just to say a couple words, just because we're in such a moment of profound disruption here in California and in the country, and disruption, despite the Silicon Valley use of the word, is not always a great thing, although sometimes it can be. The election has brought us new federal leadership, and I think we're already seeing a renewed focus on many of the issues that we care so deeply about here in California, and sustainability and resilience, and in particular equity. We are, of course, in a moment of limbo between federal leaders, and that's always challenging because it's never, we're not there yet, but we're looking ahead to some real renewed focus on these issues, and I think we can all feel good about that and really look at increased federal collaboration. On a not as positive note, as folks know, the governor yesterday put 28 counties back into the purple zone for COVID. We are seeing a major spike in cases throughout the country. And I think we were all kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop here in California, got the cold snap and the other shoe dropped, and cases have more than doubled. And I'm sure Julie will talk about this. A lot of that is sort of COVID fatigue, which is a real thing, as Secretary Galley talks about. People just being so sick of it, and I get that. But I also wanted to just note that the county strategy from the governor really reflects deep diversity in the different ways regions of the state are reacting to or are resilient in the face of COVID. Regions that we just did a presentation on this from OPR to the governor's task force on jobs and business recovery, and really noted that the regions that are the most dependent on low paid job sectors. So the sectors that have been hardest hit by COVID tend to be those with the lowest paid jobs. They're retail, they're services, they're those sort of frontline sectors, many essential workers, and that the regions most dependent on those sectors have been the hardest hit. So you see real disparity across the regions of the state in how hard hit different communities are. The regions with the least economic diversity also often have the lowest paid workers. And that also plays out, of course, by race and ethnicity. So just wanted to note from the presentation, we did some really striking facts on this. More than 1 in 3 workers in California make less than $15 an hour. Half of all Latino workers make less than $15 an hour. And 56% of workers in Fresno make less than $15 an hour. That's just a snapshot. Those less than 15-hour jobs overlap almost exactly with the hardest hit COVID sectors of the economy. And I just think as we're thinking here at Strategic Growth Council about, resilience and sustainability, it's just so important to also think about those impacts and those equity implications. I know we're all desperate now to turn our attention to recovery, and that's a big part of what we do here at the Strategic Growth Council. And as we do so, we just need to make sure we're truly investing in a recovery strategy that works for all Californians. The governor has reiterated this regional equity issue over and over and over again, ensuring our policies and strategies work across regions, across sectors, regardless of geography, economy, workforce skills. We see that commitment to regional equity in the executive order that came out on zero emission vehicles, with its focus on ensuring much broader access to EVs across the state than we've traditionally seen. We see it in the executive order on natural working land that came out with an emphasis on the huge contribution of farms and forests to our climate strategies, that they are not outside of the picture, they are part of the picture. The task force on jobs and business recovery emphasis on sustainable food and freight systems underscores how connected our regions are to each other, that if regions fall, they fall together, and if they rise together. I know that this question of regional equity is one that we're going to talk about today in our SGC conversation. I'm really looking forward to us working together on what is not an easy question, which is how can we more effectively target our policies and programs at SGC and across our agencies to ensure broad participation across all of California in line with the governor's goals. I think that we've come a long way, and really kudos to the SGC team, including tribal grant opportunities, including more technical assistance across the state. I believe we can do more to live up to the governor's promise of a California for all, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you on it. So I just wanted to make those initial comments and then turn to others for agency updates and additional comments. And I am looking at the list now. So please raise your hand if you have comments to share, or I'll just call on you. Now everyone is just stunned into silence. Julie, I'm actually going to call on you. Good, you raised your hand, to give maybe a little more color to what's happening in the state on the health impact, since that's so top of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, as you mentioned, Chair, that in the last 10 days, cases have doubled for COVID. And this is the fastest increase that we've seen since the pandemic began, even as compared to the summer, if you recall, when we also had a surge and were quite concerned. So as many of you probably were following yesterday with this news that the emergency brake that's being pulled, and just again, for a little bit of context, last week we had 13 counties in the purple tier, which is the most restrictive tier. Now we have 41 counties in the purple tier, and I believe that covers about 94% of the state's population. So a very significant move back. And also just, some specifics around that. So previously counties could move after 2 weeks because of the concern. This is now going to be after 1 week. So a difference there as well. And tiers are going to be looked at midweek versus not waiting until tier Tuesday, which is when the changes are typically announced. Just some other things to mention is just, I'll just briefly go through a few things on the healthcare surge side. We do have, I believe, about 11 surge facilities that are prepared to assist if necessary. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I think that, folks are obviously well aware of the community spread that is occurring, and that's also part of the factor with the movement in the tiers. And, maybe I'll just pause there, not take up too much time on that. But, I think people have a good sense that, we're quite concerned at this point, and asking, the public, as well as everyone, to continue to mask anytime that you're out in public, trying to maintain physical distance, and of course, trying to restrict your interaction with folks outside your household, and of course, staying home when you're not feeling well. So I'll just pause there, but happy to answer any questions about the COVID-related changes that we're seeing.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks for all the work the agency is doing to keep us all informed and, up to date. And really important point, I know the governor said the other day, or maybe Secretary Galley, just that social gathering has been a real driver of this wave. And I said this to my staff earlier today, such a hard thing to say at this moment in the year, but this year, please just
Yeah,
Please.
no, I mean, that's
please pay attention.
a great point of what we've seen, perhaps related to gatherings and then other significant things that have happened, of course, with the election, as well as Halloween and so forth. And then I think you mentioned it as well, Chair. I mean, I think the pandemic fatigue is a very real thing. I mean, we're going on 8 months of this. And yeah, quite frankly, I mean, I think those that are working on this day in and day out, as well as everyone affected in the public, I mean, people are just, tired and they want to see their family and their friends. And so I think, unfortunately, we're seeing some of the results of that. And yeah, it's also very difficult as we go into the holiday season, to very large gathering type holidays. So it's tough. Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. I was reminded just now by text that I skipped over the approval of the minutes. Apologies for that. I'm going to do that really quick, and then I'm going to come back to council member updates. I know there's a couple folks who have texted me. So I hope people have looked at the minutes from the last meeting, and then we will call for a motion on those.
I move approval of the minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
Second from Secretary Kim. Thank you. Roll call on the minutes, please.
Chair Gordon,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flatt,
Yes.
Secretary Blumenfeld,
Yes.
Nicole Capritz,
Yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Hansen,
Yes.
Assistant Secretary Soulier,
Yes.
Secretary Kim,
Yes.
and Secretary Ross.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much, everybody. And Secretary Ross, thanks for joining. Good to see you. I don't see hands, but I know that Amanda had an update from CNRA, so I will turn to her.
Hi, everyone. Wade will be joining us in about 30 to 45 minutes, so apologies. I'm going to convey what he would have said if he were here. A lot's happened since the council last met. I believe it was August. So three updates from the Resources Agency. The first is just, I think it goes without saying, but we've obviously just faced the most destructive wildfire season in California's history. Just super evident to us that this really, the federal and state partnership to deliver on our commitments to improve forest health, to protect and support our first responders, and to fund work in the forests to build climate resilience is really critical. I think the other key takeaway, which the governor doubled down on, was just the need to invest in climate resilience, that we are we need to accelerate all of our actions to address climate change. That leads into the sort of second update here, which is, the governor released 2 executive orders calling on state agencies to accelerate action on climate change, both in the transportation sector and through the use of nature-based solutions. I'll just flag for the folks who are on the line that the nature-based solutions executive order calls on state agencies to deliver a climate smart land strategy, as well as a pathways document to achieve the established goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. And we are going to begin stakeholder engagement for both of those processes in Q1 of next year. So just wanted to let folks know that. And then the third update is just to say that we're really excited at the Resources Agency to deliver on the goals of the Native American Ancestral Land State Policy and to advance more co-management of natural resources with tribes. And lastly, we have a position that has just been announced and is open. We're hiring an Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And I should say most of the agencies, if not all, that are on the SGC are actually part of the Natural Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. So there's a lot of overlap with the sustainable growth principles that we all talk about all the time, and a lot of opportunity for engagement. So thanks for flagging that. Secretary Blumenfeld, I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm sure people want to hear more about the transportation executive order and the zero emission vehicle part in particular.
Thank you, Kate, and everyone. I mean, I think it's another great example of the role that SGC provides, which is this coordination amongst and between all the different agencies that have a role in climate. And whereas climate used to just be seen as an environmental issue, now it's a housing issue, it's a transportation issue, it's an ag issue, it's an issue of healthcare, it's an issue of resiliency. So these executive orders, as Amanda spoke to, kind of really stem from the governor, you know, all of us living through that orange haze nightmarish event and saying two things. One, we need to accelerate what we're currently doing. And secondly, we need to look and see what we're not doing. And as you pointed out, Kate, nearly everyone in this group kind of coordinated and came together to think about the best ways of doing that. The first executive order set out, the headline was really around the goal to manufacturers to have 100% zero emission vehicle sale by 2035. But under that was a lot of heavy duty work on thinking about the entire transportation sector. And in addition to that, a focus on supply side. So both how we make the transition to cleaner fuels quicker and more effective, and then secondly, how we look at things like setbacks, and that's another thing, you know, within resources that Wade and Amanda are doing, and then finally working with the legislature to set a date for ending the practice of hydraulic fracturing. So it was a lot happening, really great progress. And maybe Karen can speak in her update. You know, the other element to the 30 by 30 executive order that Amanda talked to was natural and working lands, which obviously fits into a lot of the work that SGC does in multiple different programs. So, you know, I think going into the budget discussion, you know, our priorities are clear within our agency, and it kind of segues into some other discussions we're going to have today. But really, it's about making sure that we protect public health and the environment, that we focus on equity, and that we really think about economic recovery as part and parcel to everything we do. So from our agency's perspective at Cal EPA, that's really how we're thinking about this budget, and look forward to the only final thing that I'd say, just to kind of add on to what Amanda said, is we recently, the governor's office, led by Christina Schneider, hosted an incredibly successful 2-day tribal conference, and just really helpful to listen to tribal leaders, understand their concerns and issues and the opportunities, which are numerous, from us to learn from them, think about how we can fit that into the SGC context. And then finally, just kudos to everyone at SGC for really continuing to push equity and environmental justice as a big focal area that we all need to continue doubling down on. And we can talk about that more as the agenda evolves today. But thank you, Chair Gordon, for that opportunity.
Thank you so much. I wanted to get a quick update because no one's raising their hands, which is unusual for you all, but just because it's related to SGC work and various stakeholders have asked about it, a quick update from Secretary Kim on the last year's executive order implementation, on specifically related to vehicle miles traveled and the work that you're doing in your agency. And then from Secretary Ross, if you'd like to jump in after that on some of the natural working land stuff. Secretary Kim, can I put you on the spot?
Yes, thanks, Chair Gordon. We've been developing what's called the Climate Action Transportation Plan actually, let me back up. Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI. That is the plan that will guide our efforts in terms of utilizing state transportation discretionary funds to reduce GHG, VMT, and so forth. We had a great discussion just a couple weeks ago at the joint CTC CARB HCD meeting, and we've had some public workshops, and so that effort is underway, and a lot of stakeholder engagement Appreciate everybody on this call who's been a part of that effort. So more to come. We plan to release a draft CAPDI in the early part of 2021. Also, I should mention that the California Transportation Commission staff released a series of recommendations yesterday for $2 billion worth of transportation projects throughout the state. These are from 3 programs created by SB1, Solutions for Congested Corridors, Local Partnership Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. They run the gamut across all modes. A significant chunk of that funding will go to transit projects, as well as active transportation, pedestrian and bicycle projects. So those are out there for public review. Please take a look. They are posted on the CTC website. Next step, the commission will take it up for consideration at its meeting on December 2nd. So a huge investment that will create 100,000 jobs if approved by the commission. And again, urge everyone to take a look.
Thanks so much, Secretary Kim. Yeah, definitely urge folks to weigh in on those. They're very related to a lot of the work we're talking about here. I'm going to go to Secretary Ross and then to Mike Plaid.
I'll be as quick as possible, but Secretary Kim, my ears perked up around that $2 billion number. Like no one has money like that these days. And Sharon knows I'm never in a meeting where money's talked about that I don't really pay attention. And speaking of that, we did release our very last round of dairy digester and alternative manure management project grants.
Karen, you're cutting out.
Yeah, Secretary Ross, you froze.
More than halfway there. So
Secretary Ross, you froze right after saying you were releasing your new grants. So can you go
Karen
back?
always does this to show how little money CDFA has.
And I'm at the office. It's supposed to be more secure. We released our last round of grants to dairy families for methane reduction projects. And so they've really stepped into this space and they're more than halfway to reaching our goal of reducing methane reductions from dairies by 40%. So they continue to make really significant progress. And Secretary Kim, we're especially excited about the cow-powered highway that the low carbon fuel standard is allowing for this renewable natural gas to be used as a replacement for some of our fossil fuels. So it's a very exciting opportunity. With regard to the national working lands, it is a tremendous opportunity to really partner with farmers and ranchers and those who live and work on the land to really think about how we can be a drawdown of carbon to sequester that carbon. Obviously, my passion project is the Healthy Soils Project, and all of the things that we do to really hold carbon in our soils, which then ensures food security for the long-term future. It helps us with our drought resiliency because of the improved water holding capacity. It improves nutrient cycling so that we're really improving water quality. So it has multiple benefits. And so that's just one of the programs that will be convening our stakeholders to really identify those farmer-led solutions that we want to make sure surface up through our scoping plan process. And then we look forward to being a partner with the Resources Agency on the Natural Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. I do want to add, Chair Gordon, because I appreciated your opening comments, even though I had to jump off for a phone call. Over the last 2 weeks in particular, the level of everyday, only people who read agricultural newsletters would appreciate every day the lengthy and significant content in newsletters calling on the opportunities that farmers have to be a part of the solution, and how many national commodity organizations, national farm organizations, partnering with conservation organizations, and national and international brand names in the food and beverage sector are partnering together to create alliances to really move the needle on carbon sequestration and really finding ways for farmers who have suffered tremendous setbacks in trade and the economy the last 3 years to provide these benefits and maybe some additional revenue streams for the good work that they do. And just today, my national association was part of a new alliance that was announced, and it's building off of a policy that we introduced on climate smart solutions at our national meeting last year. A good friend of mine is chairing the transition committee for the incoming administration, and Robert released a paper last week that really outlines a new and bold strategy to use existing funds at USDA to create carbon banking and really accelerate these opportunities to quantify and reward ecosystem services. So it's not usual that we have a national coalition wanting to go in the same direction that California is going. So I think it is just a great time to think about how we integrate climate into everything that we do. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Secretary Ross. That is why we're all here. So really agree with you. I'm going to go to Vice Chair Vlad and then to Secretary Castro Ramirez. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. I just wanted to also echo the appreciation for recognizing the disparity of impacts with regard to with this COVID. And but I want to also thank the administration. Thank everyone on the Strategic Growth Council and staff for recognizing not only that, but being part of the solution. As you stated, we can do better. I think we will do better, but also don't want to lose sight of the fact that strategic growth is a part of the solution, and what we're doing on an annual basis with our meetings is rectifying those disparities. And so I look forward to a lot of the public input that we're going to receive. You know, I'm a city manager for a under-resourced community in Southeast Los Angeles, and that disparity is just unbelievably real. I don't know how to put it better into words than you did, but you know, we're finding ourselves, I always feel compelled to speak on behalf of all local government, but we find ourselves in areas that we've never been in before. We are addressing food insecurity and providing food, much of it with the resources that have been provided from the administration and also from at the federal level through community development block grant money. But we're providing mental health services, we're providing food, we're providing rental assistance, we're helping to provide grants and loans to small businesses. We're dealing with unprecedented unemployment in our region. And it's taking a heavy toll, and during a good year, there's a disparate access to resources in Southeast Los Angeles, and this has exacerbated that beyond anything that I've ever seen. So again, I applaud Strategic Growth Council staff for taking on disparate impacts as though you're the only cause, or that it's your sole responsibility, and really appreciate every effort that has been made thus far, and look forward to improving those efforts. And one of the values, we talk about the horizontal integration between the departments, but I really value the sort of vertical integration between the state level and then the county and at my level, at the city level, that takes place. And you really want to continue to grow that sort of vertical integration. And with that, I'll stop talking.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate those comments and the work you're doing at the local level, which is the front lines of most of this. So really appreciate you. I'm going to go finally to Secretary Castro Ramirez, and then finally to Public Member Nicole Capritz. And then I think, unless there's final comments, we will move into the next item. So Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd really appreciate the comments from our council member, Mike Flatt. Mike, I don't know if you know, but I grew up in Linwood. And so as you were mentioning Southeast communities, you know, of course, I was thinking about Linwood. My family still resides in Linwood. And so I hold the Southeast area close to my heart. You know, it's so thank you for your leadership, and thank you for reminding us of all of the great work that is happening at the local level, and really the unprecedented level of engagement in a number of different areas. We very much appreciate the way that local government has really stepped up, to meet the many challenges impacting communities. So just briefly, in terms of housing and homelessness and the work that is happening through agency and really across state government, a lot has happened since the last time we met. First on the initiative, the Home Key initiative that I think I mentioned the last time we met. We were in the kind of early stages of launching Home Key. Now we've sort of fast forward. The state has issued about $844 million in CRF funds to support 94 unique projects across the state, all to create about 6,200 housing units. And these are units, housing units for individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk to become homeless as a result of the COVID-19 public health crisis that we're under. And so just a tremendous, just kudos and gratitude to the various state agencies and departments that were part of this. The funding, of course, was awarded through the Housing and Community Development Department, but this effort really took several agencies, to work collaboratively, including Health and Human Services, and also the Government Operations Agency through the Department of General Services. The other just sort of quick announcement as it relates to homelessness is on Friday, our Homeless Financing and Coordinating Council released an RFP for $300 million in what we call HAP 2.0. These are dollars that were appropriated in this year's budget to continue to provide support to local continuums and homeless service providers, and just encourage you all to visit the BCSH or HCFC website for more information on that. And the third sort of update is, as I was reflecting on your words, Chair, regarding the ongoing sort of challenges, given the increase in COVID cases and COVID hospitalizations. We are continuing our work on standing up what we call the 4Ps approach to addressing housing and homelessness, protecting individuals, continuing to do our work, and continuing to do everything possible to preserve, produce more affordable housing, and also, of course, always with a focus on people. And so, to that end, a few months ago, we began an internal process that included BCSH, the Department of Finance, HCD, the Housing Finance Agency, to take a look at the overall affordable housing finance system, and to really begin to take a deep dive in terms of understanding really what we're producing and what where the opportunities lie in terms of greater alignment and greater coordination, and that effort that's been ongoing for the last 4 months or so have also led to us being able to weigh in on a process that was launched by the Treasurer. Treasurer Ma began a process about a year ago through the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee to consider making some regulatory changes to the state's debt allocation committee for 2021. And as that process was underway, led by a very robust stakeholder engagement process, we within agency and through this effort of taking a look at the housing finance system, were able to develop a set of recommendations and a set of principles that have been presented now to CIDLAC and have been adopted as part of the 2021 debt allocation scoring criteria. And I just wanted to briefly share what those principles are, because I think they speak to the importance of how sort of housing connects to, and we've talked about transportation, we've talked about climate, we've talked about economic development. And so I wanted to share these principles, because these are basically the principles that will continue to help us at the state level better organize our work around affordable housing preservation, affordable housing production, and then of course continuing to advance our efforts around preventing and ending homelessness. So the value set that we've adopted, and that is informing the CIDLAC process, includes first that funding to the greatest degree possible when it is going for in support of housing units will be producing and supporting the production of housing units that are not being produced by the market. And so, of course, very important for us to understand sort of where the gaps lie. Secondly, we are recommitting to the affirmatively furthering fair housing principles and making sure that we're doing everything possible to continue our work to integrate communities and to address and support place-based strategies. Third, beyond funding, we intend to carry out our regulatory and enforcement powers to influence and monitor zoning, permitting, and the production of housing. So we know funding is critically important, but I think equally important is the ability to be able to to leverage our regulatory and enforcement powers. The fourth area is within the various housing entities, looking at ways to expedite and become more efficient. I think many of you know that the governor signed AB 434, which will lead to essentially changes within HCD and changes that will lead to consolidating several housing programs. So very much, that's aligned to the commitment to streamline and to make the affordable housing system more, predictable. And that, leads to sort of the fifth point, which is around decreasing the cost and time of getting projects through the state process. And of course, also building a robust, preservation strategy. We've done a lot of good work in terms of preserving housing affordability, but we know that there's much more that can be done. And then lastly, we also recognize that as we continue to further our commitment to equity and inclusion, that we need to do more to open up the system to bring in community development corporations that are led by Black, Brown, and Indigenous people through this, sort of process of engaging in helping to inform the SITLAC process or the SITLAC scoring system. We heard from the Black Developers Forum about the challenges that they have had with regard to accessing the state financing resources, and those are very much beyond sort of the challenges. They shared with us a number of recommendations that we have taken to heart and are advancing both within agency, but also, as we help to inform the SITLAC scoring system. So all that to say is that, there's a lot of work that is taking place to help bring the various housing entities to a place where we're not just better aligned and coordinated, but we are targeting resources where the need is the greatest. And then the last thing that I will mention is yesterday, our Housing and Community Development Department announced that as a result of some of the changes that are taking place within the SITLAC regulatory process, they will be pausing on the release of several guidelines and several NOFAs until the SITLAC regulations are fully adopted. Again, I think this was the prudent thing to do to ensure that we're continuing to do what we can to bring the various state housing agencies together to ensure that there's that we're aligned at the policy level to the administration priorities, and that we're also creating certainty and efficiencies for the affordable housing development community. So that's a lot.
Thank you. It's super important. Thank you, Secretary Castro Ramirez, especially the principles. So thank you for sharing those. I think that was really, really relevant to today's discussion. Nicole, you had your hand up earlier and then you took it down. Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah. Only thing I want to say is I think all the secretaries and the administration have done a pretty extraordinary job navigating these multiple intersecting crises. So thank you. And I really appreciated the comments about the vertical integration between what's happening at the state and what we're seeing on the front lines. I was going to speak more to that front. I always talk about our battle against sprawl, just because it's so relevant to everything we're discussing, but I'll do that another time. I do also just want to give a shout out because I looked at the attendees list for the first time. I'm super lame on Zoom, and so I always miss that before. And I see everybody from San Diego, so I just want to give a shout out to all my people in San Diego because we've been coordinating and collaborating in a way we never have. And thank you guys for being on the call, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Capritz. I am at home with my two children, and our internet keeps going out, and there's multiple IT needs that keep happening. So I apologize. Slightly distracted for a minute there, and it's raining, which makes life more exciting. So thank you, everybody. Really good comments. Always really appreciate. I know it takes a little bit of time, but I always really appreciate the fact is that SGC's work is so cross-cutting and everybody's comments are so critical to the work we're doing. So really appreciate that. I am going to turn now to Director Bedsworth for her Executive Director report.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know Fabiha will bring up the slides. And I know this is a pause on the way to the topic most people want to talk through. So I will try to keep this fairly brief, but did want to give some updates just on some activities that are happening, some staffing updates. If you want to go to the next slide, Fabiha, thank you. So I'll run through just some quick staffing updates and then some program updates. And I'll turn to Sloan Viola to talk through legislative updates. So next slide. I'm excited that we have a few new folks joining us and some shifts in our team that I just thought I would share with everybody. First, Sandra Lupian is now the Deputy Director for External Affairs and Communications, so supporting across both OPR and SGC, and we're going to be building out that team a little bit more. We've had a big focus on how to tell the story of the work that we do at SGC and also at OPR, and so really excited about growing that team. We're also happy to have William Walker join us, who we snagged actually from OPR, so he didn't have to go far, but is joining our team as a transportation planner. And I'll talk a little bit later on what he'll be taking on, which is specific to some statutory direction we have under Assembly Bill 285. Very excited that yesterday was the first full day of our new executive fellow, Sarah Newsham, who's a recent graduate of Carleton College, but a native of Oakland, California. And so she is joining us as well. So that's always exciting when the executive fellows arrive and add a tremendous amount of capacity and energy. Elizabeth Rosemarin-Noska joined SGC as a student assistant to our communications and external affairs team. And this has always been a role we've always maintained filled. And Elizabeth is actually in graduate school, recent graduate from UC Berkeley, so just brings tremendous capacity to that team. We're thrilled to have her. And then Dalila Madison Almquist joined the Public Health Institute team, who we partner with on the on the Health and All Policies program and on the Capital Collaborative on Race and Equity. She joins us from PolicyLink, and we're just thrilled to have her on board to partner with us on this work. We also have two positions that we're looking to fill. One is the communications officer role, which will be a part of this new communications and external affairs team, and then an analyst to support our high-speed rail partnership, which we've had in place for several years, really looking to support station area planning and other issues around high-speed rail. So a lot going on, even in our remote work environment. Next slide, please. So these are just a few program updates. First, I wanted to let everybody know that last week we launched Partners Advancing Climate Equity, which is a capacity building program, really looking at how to build leaders on the ground in under-resourced communities to build up capacity to partner, to access state resources, to engage with local planning processes. This is really something we see as a precursor, or sort of trying to lay some of the groundwork for the regional climate collaboratives program that was established at SGC under SB 1072. And so this is using some existing technical assistance resources. We've been able to launch this partnership. Applications are due December 3rd. I know we've shared this widely, especially at the staff level. We had an informational webinar last week, and we're overwhelmed to see nearly 300 participants, with close to 200 indicating an interest in applying. So that's very exciting to see. We're also really excited about this effort because, in line with our principles for best practices for engaging with under-resourced communities, we secured a $200,000 grant from US EPA to support participants who are selected to be part of this program. And so they will get up to an $8,000 stipend to be part of the training program. So we're really excited about this, and happy to share additional information. If anyone has questions, I encourage them to reach out to our Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. Next slide. There's a lot happening continuing at the Racial Equity Works. Just wanted to quickly touch on sort of three pieces of this. One, the Capital Collaborative on Race and Equity is continuing. It is carried on through a remote shifting and moving to a remote training environment, which is definitely different from previous years, but continuing to evolve and providing and hosting training modules for 15 teams. And there's a meeting later in December for executive sponsors. We also are working on our own racial equity action plan, working with each of our programs to really identify priority actions for the coming year. This is also something we've been doing a virtual, each year we usually do a 2-day SGC staff retreat. This year we're doing it spread out over in smaller modules over several weeks. And actually tomorrow we will be spending time really digging in on our racial equity action plan and priority actions for the coming year. And then finally, after the passage of the racial equity resolution in August, which we were incredibly proud of, and thank you all for doing that and the leadership, Jesse Buendia has convened a racial equity working group with representatives from each of our member agencies to really dig in on implementation and realizing the goals of that resolution. That group's meeting monthly to support that process and really look towards our February and August council meetings, and really getting per direction from the council of hosting that conversation at least 2 council meetings a year. And we've also really just been talking about how to support one another through racial equity action plan development and other activities that have been are going on in each agency. Next slide, please. The Health and Equity Program, which we really formed in just in the spring, so has been doing all of its work since we've been in a remote work environment, is developing a work plan for the Health and All Policies Task Force. The Health and All Policies Task Force has been in place now for 10 years. And with the additional capacity that we have at SGC and with our partnership with the Public Health Institute, we're really looking at what are the next steps and how can the Health and All Policies Task Force be most effective and an asset to state government. So staff is working with the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley, and soon we'll be doing a survey for state and local partners that'll be distributed next month. And we've worked with many of your staff who have been part of the Health and All Policies Task Force to gather input on priorities and what we want to look at accomplishing over the next 5 years. In addition, with the new capacity, we've been developing Health and All Policies Task Force operating guidelines and partnership parameters, really to delineate the role of the state agencies, so Strategic Growth Council and the Department of Public Health, in our partnership with the Public Health Institute. Next slide, please. We'll talk much more in December about the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, but I did want to provide an update just that we have had record program demand, which is really exciting to see. So in this round, we had 52 acquisition applications compared to 36 in previous rounds. Also tremendous geographic spread. We've always struggled to attract applications from southern parts of the state, and we're pleased to have the full geography north to south represented. And then we have 10 planning grant applications. And we all know ag land conservation planning is a critical piece to getting to that, to the acquisition stage. So really excited about that. We actually are meeting tomorrow on this, and we'll be bringing award recommendations to the council in December. And we see this as a really important piece of, we want to think about how this can best contribute to the natural and working land strategy. Next slide, please. I just want to give an update on the in June, as you all remember, we had Award-a-Palooza and we made a lot of grant awards. We have all 6 of our research grants executed and are doing kickoff meetings this month. And we're finalizing our round 3 grant agreements for transformative climate communities. And this is really exciting, especially that we have refined this process to be able to execute these very complex grant agreements in 6 to 8 months. So that's really exciting, and work is getting underway. We've also seen, just on the TCC side, really important groundbreakings and milestones being hit in previous round awardees, including breaking ground on the community college campus in Fresno. Next slide, please. The Tribal Government Challenge, which we conducted in partnership with the California Energy Commission, recommended awards to 8 tribes to do planning grants on climate and energy issues. We're finalizing those grant agreements. We'll be making a more public announcement about those soon. Another part of that partnership was conducting a tribal gap analysis, and this was launched in September. We awarded a contract, and they're gathering information on climate and energy related priorities and needs in tribal communities throughout California. So we'll be working with state agency tribal liaisons to bring them into this process, because we want this to be something that will be valuable and can inform a lot of our efforts across a number of programs. Next slide, please. Finally, on the transformative climate communities, program staff has convened, or is convening this week, a Disadvantaged Unincorporated Communities, or DUCS, work group. Senate Bill 351 by Senator Hurtado directed TCC to develop guidance on how to include DUCS in TCC. Of course, we don't currently have funding for another round of grants, but we are working with the bill's advocates to establish the work group that'll include researchers, non-governmental organizations, state and local governments. And this really will be considering how to integrate DUCS in the context of the unique and challenges that they face in TCC. I think there will also be valuable lessons and insights for other programs as well. Many state agencies are engaged in this work, and so we're looking forward to getting that underway. We'll report out to the council on the work group's findings early next year. Next slide. We also have several regional planning initiatives. We've reconvened the state MPO work group, really to advance dialogue with cross-state agencies on transportation and housing and climate priorities with our regional agencies. And then I mentioned with the addition, the new staff, William Walker, who's joined our team, and he will be working with us to implement Assembly Bill 285, authored by Assemblymember Friedman, which is directs SGC to look at the California Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategies, and state funding programs. This, of course, will be building off of the executive order work that Secretary Kim mentioned, work from the Housing and Transportation Work Group. And so we're just getting this work started to really understand how to best align and build on these ongoing activities in the development of this report. Next slide. And that is everything we have, or many things that we have going on right now that I wanted to just make the council aware of. I'm happy to answer questions, or I can turn it over to Sloan to give the legislative update.
I'm not seeing hands. Just a reminder to council members to raise your hand, and everybody go into the participants tab found at the bottom of your screen, and should be a raised hand function. I know some people's Zooms don't have that, so but that should be there for most of you. I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, Louise, so we can turn to Sloan.
Great. All yours, Sloan.
Thanks, Louise, and good afternoon, council members. My name is Sloan Viola. I'm the Ledge Director for OPR and SGC. Next slide, please. So for my final ledge update of the year, I wanted to provide a brief high-level overview of this last legislative session. The COVID-19 pandemic caused significant disruptions to this year's legislative session, as you might imagine. Precautionary recesses were necessary to avoid spreading the disease, but they kept members out of Sacramento, which compressed the timeline to pass legislation. This required many bills to be put on hold to focus on legislation related to pandemic response and a few other top priorities. So instead of a typical 1,000 or 2,000 bills passing the legislature, only 428 were sent to the governor's desk. Of those, 372 were signed and 56 were vetoed. This veto rate, which is around 13%, is the fourth lowest since 1967. And this graph, prepared by the Senate Office of Research, visualizes trends in bills signed and vetoed by the governor over this time period. And it just really demonstrates how unprecedented 2020 was. Next slide, please. So it's pretty heartening to see that climate change was one of those key legislative priorities that allowed some bills to pass through the legislature this year. AB 2800 by Assemblymember Quirk repealed the sunset date of a previous bill, also called AB 2800, that required the consideration of climate risk in infrastructure planning and financing. It also established a climate safe infrastructure working group to make recommendations on best practices for infrastructure planning in light of climate risk. Going forward, this working group will convene only as resources allow, given that the state is in a little bit of a budget crisis given the economic recession spurred by COVID-19. Then finally, SB 1320 by Senator Stern codifies the California Climate Change Assessment as a responsibility of the Office of Planning and Research, which is undertaken in close partnership with the Strategic Growth Council, the Natural Resources Agency, and the Energy Commission. So thank you so much for your time, and you'll be hearing from me early next year once we have a new session and a whole new slate of bills on our hands, but I'm happy to take any questions on these if you have any.
Thanks so much, Sloan, for all your work on this, and to everyone actually on the council. Many of us were involved in many pieces of these, so thank you. Any questions or comments from council members? And I am not actually looking at all of you, I'm just looking at my raised hand, so I will look at you as well, just to make sure you're not frantically waving at me. Okay, thank you. Perfect. I think unless there are no questions for this, we are going to go to our main agenda item. I did want to let folks know, just given that we're getting to our main agenda item an hour in, I am going to ask for a short break around 2:30, just so that we can all stretch a little and take maybe 5 to 7 minutes around 2:30, so you can plan around that. But before that, let's go to our HSC item. And I think, Louise, are you starting and then turning to Ryan?
Yes, I will start us off. And I think that timing should work well. And maybe we can get through the presentation and take a break before we.
Perfect. That's a good way to do it.
So I just wanted to provide a quick introduction because we did have a last minute shift in the agenda, which we announced yesterday. And it really follows on Secretary Castro Ramirez's points around being part of that pause to look at alignment of AHSC's guidelines with the CIDLAC regulations, and really wanting to ensure that our projects are still going to be well aligned with that process in terms of just overall funding or financing for projects. And so with that, it does actually give an opportunity, I think, as well, to really host what is an important discussion. And I'll just talk a bit through what we've been working on since June. I think at the June council meeting, it was very clear. We had clear direction from the council to look at how we can get a regional distribution of awards. And I use the term also regional distribution was really looking at how does every region and part of the state see an opportunity to participate in AHSC. We see this as really important because it demonstrates a specific type of development can happen in all types of communities, so that we can see affordable housing, near transit, and active transportation and urban greening, and these integrated approaches occur in all communities. And so we undertook with our partners to look at how to think about regional distribution, ultimately coming up with a structure of regional targets following the 8 regional early action planning regions that HCD has established, and establishing a goal to get at least 1 award in each of those 8 regions. We also, though, know that this is a climate change program as well. And so really trying to think about how do we couple this regional approach with maintaining a focus on climate change and getting encouraging, continuing to push the envelope to get the best projects available. And so came up with a structure with regional targets coupled with score thresholds. And I think for folks who have followed the program for a long time, this is the first time we introduced a score threshold. And this was both a total score and a greenhouse gas scoring threshold. Another piece that really coming out of the June meeting was very clear that we all needed to be thinking about, and I know we're all thinking about in all aspects of our lives, are the impacts that COVID-19 has had on development timelines, and that is reflected here, but more importantly on transit systems and really just on how communities are approaching these types of projects. And so we wanted to be responsive to account for the current uncertainty, but continue to support the types of projects that we know transit agencies want to do. And so we explored a couple of different ways in partnership closely with CalSTA and with our transit agencies to think about how to best support transit and how to score transit and thinking through that. And ultimately where we've landed actually is continuing to score transit through our greenhouse gas calculator, but we explored other options as well. And so these were both, these two topics in particular really came out of that June discussion, but I think hit on some of the complexities of trying to design such an integrated program. And so I know we'll hear a lot of comments on this today. And so Ryan will walk through where we are at this moment. But in short, what we have put forward in this draft of guidelines is a proposal with regional targets coupled with score thresholds, and then really maintaining a very similar approach to greenhouse gas reduction scoring, but where we're looking at transit, both to account for shifts and changes that have happened as a result of COVID so that agencies don't get penalized by declines that they're currently seeing in ridership that we all assume will be temporary. But that also accounts for some regional differences in transit. And so with this delay, I think we're looking forward to just really continuing this conversation and discussion on these topics, taking an opportunity to hear from stakeholders and get input from council members. So thank you all for being here today to help us really figure out the best path forward. And so just before I do turn it over, I really want to give a huge thank you to our staff, to HCD staff, and to CARB staff who have worked tirelessly over the last several months to grapple with these issues, which are not easy, and to our stakeholders who have been really thoughtful partners and our technical assistance providers in really helping us try to think through what is challenging. And I think look forward to this conversation today so that we can figure out what the best next steps are for moving this forward. And so with that, I will turn it over unless there's anything from the council members. I'm happy to turn it over to Ryan.
I don't think I see any. Wait, I have maybe. Oh, nope, I don't see any hands from the council members. So let's turn it over.
Well, thank you, Director Bedsworth, for providing that contextual overview. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Ryan Silver. I'm the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities, also known as AHSC or ASIC Program Manager. Could we go to the next slide, please? So today we're going to discuss the latest draft of the AHSC guidelines. In this presentation, I'm first going to quickly visit AHSC's goals and requirements before providing an overview of certain changes made for the Council's consideration and public discussion. For anyone who'd like to see a full list of changes proposed, please visit the SGC website. You can see under our meeting materials, the AHSC staff report. Next slide, please. So beginning with the program overview and goals, AHSC is funded through a continuous appropriation from cap and trade auction proceeds. In combination with SALC, we receive 20% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, 18% going solely to AHSC. Our primary goal is reducing greenhouse gas emissions through projects that implement land use, housing, and transportation practices, all to support infill and compact development. But within that, we're also tasked with supporting coordinated and related public policy objectives, some of which include advancing public health, increasing connectivity to jobs, and improving conditions within disadvantaged communities, all of which inform our approach. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly cover our eligible costs while displaying an example of how these costs are implemented. So this project you see on your screen, Coalinga, is a rural award made this past June. So AHSC funds construction of transit proximate affordable housing and related infrastructure to support multifamily development. That's about 2/3 of our costs or funding every round. The other third largely goes to transportation projects, which include transit improvements such as increasing route frequency, providing new service, adding and enhancing transit stops, and other improvements that generally support rider accessibility. We also make improvements for the active transportation system surrounding projects, such as complete streets, sidewalk expansion and replacement, new bike lanes and paths, pedestrian safety improvements, and urban greening projects. We also have about 1% of funds round to round that are awarded towards programs supporting mode shift towards low carbon transportation options, reducing air pollution exposure, supporting workforce development, and new to this round, providing tenant legal counseling services. Next slide, please. And also just wanted to quickly highlight a project awarded 4 years ago, which recently opened to residents in Santa Ana, just to show you all how your votes on approving awards each year are faring, many of which are now currently operational. So this project, originally designed as a commercial space, the Santa Ana Arts Collective received an award for its thoughtful conversion to residential, with units reserved for artists and their families. The project's located next to an express bus route and is just a mile away from Santa Ana's Regional Transportation Center and near the planned streetcar expansion or implementation. Additionally, the project funded an active transportation corridor through downtown Santa Ana in an area that particularly struggled with bicycle and pedestrian safety issues. In combination, this project not only provides much needed affordable housing to the community, but builds off of local plans around transportation expansion and commercial corridor enhancement, providing benefits not just to project residents, but also the surrounding community. Next slide, please. So to date, AHSC has completed 5 funding rounds and made 126 awards. This is going to result in over 11,000 units produced in transit proximate and amenity rich areas, about a quarter of those units providing supportive services or catering to seniors and veterans. AHSC projects also support sustainable development patterns in manners that fit local context. So projects maximize housing density, support mode shift through a combined approach to both enhancing walkability and bikeability, while also supporting transit expansion, not just through the investment, but through supportive land use design. These projects are all informed by community input, and they're designed with sensitivity to emerging climate impacts, and additionally constructed in manners that support local economic development, all of which are informed by AHSC's coordinated approach to various public policy objectives. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to cover a few guideline updates that received public comments and were a big focus of staff updates these past couple of months, and do so at a high level. Next slide, please. And then just quickly before that, I'm going to cover our process to these updates. So following direction from the council at our June awards meeting, we identified geographic distribution of awards, homeownership projects, access to funding, and addressing issues arising from COVID-19 as key topics for us to focus on. We put a lot of importance on the inclusive process to our guidelines updates, which officially began with a 10-day public comment period following last round's awards. Building off of these comments and stakeholder meetings, an interagency group of staff from SGC, HCD, and the Air Resources Board, along with other agencies and departments serving in technical advisory roles, set into these updates. Next slide, please. All of this informed our initial draft guidelines, which were issued for a 30-day public comment period. More stakeholder meetings, 3 public workshops, and multiple working groups led us to this point today. In total, we received over 70 public comment letters representing a variety of stakeholder groups and coalitions, including some and interest groups that have never previously commented on AHSC. Moving forward, we're going to continue to keep stakeholder feedback at the center of our guidelines updates process and greatly appreciate this level of participation so far. Next slide, please. So moving into our actual guidelines updates. The first change I'm going to cover is our round 6 pilot to establish geographic targets for AHSC awards. As we heard at the June council meeting, many AHSC applicants expressed difficulty in accessing AHSC funds. In response to a council directive to address geographic access to awards, staff are proposing setting targets of 1 award to each of the 8 geographies described within the guidelines and displayed here on this slide. So this is intended to ensure some level of minimum access to AHSC, so long as projects can meet our minimum score requirements, which I'll get into next. These targets are going to help AHSC, as Louise mentioned, display the value of transit-oriented infill development in a variety of urban contexts, similar to how we've seen examples of this in AHSC awards to date. And as I mentioned, this is a pilot. Staff are going to continue to work with stakeholders to address geographic distribution concerns in a manner that doesn't require corrective action during the awards process. Next slide, please. So in complement to geographic targets, we're also proposing minimum score requirements for any project to receive an award. These minimums are aimed to ensure a continued high level of quality across AHSC awards while we introduce more funding targets and maintaining an emphasis on AHSC's primary goal of GHG reduction. So we began by looking at the lowest common score of awarded projects in each of the past 3 rounds, with the goal of maintaining that minimum quality in our future awards. Our GHG threshold was originally proposed in our draft guidelines as a score threshold, which we changed to a value of metric tons of CO2 equivalent threshold in this latest draft. Each of these thresholds were designed to restrict competition to the top 70% of projects scoring in each of these regards, that is total score and greenhouse gas reduction estimates. I just want to note that AHSC's tribal target is excluded from both of these requirements. Next slide, please. We also made an adjustment to our greenhouse gas scoring process, and just starting with the 30 points overall, which is maintain consistency, we're also proposing to keep consistency with 15 points allocated to the cost efficiency of greenhouse gases reduced. The remaining 15 points, which are for the total value of estimated GHGs reduced, we are proposing splitting this into 2 categories. One for reductions from transit projects and another for reductions from housing, land use, active transportation, and renewable energy generation. In recent rounds from AHSC, or reductions from AHSC transit projects have been proportionally larger than those of all other project components combined, to the point where the other components have been less consequential for greenhouse gas scoring. Separating these 10 points out for the affordable housing, the land use, active transportation, and renewable energy reductions puts an increased emphasis on their potential while remaining or maintaining 20 points on GHG reductions from transit projects, as these transit projects will continue to put a heavy influence or play a large role within the cost efficiency scoring. Next slide, please. Oh, and actually, I just wanted to quickly note our greenhouse gas scores are determined competitively, with the maximum points in each category going to those top 20% of projects within each of those categories. Subsequently, there are less points available for each subsequent tier below that. We do this scoring for each project area type separately. Next slide, please. So in addition to the 8 points we already have for green building standards, we're proposing adding 2 more points for all electric housing design. We at SGC, we are truly committed to advancing the state's movement towards electrifying the grid and supporting housing developers and advancing their understanding of all electric design, and have included a notice within the guidelines that all electric design will eventually become a requirement for all AHSC projects, not just a scoring incentive. Next slide, please. So at the direction of the council in June, we conducted some additional analysis into programmatic barriers to homeownership projects within AHSC, as well as the fit of homeownership projects. Whereas previously on a unit by unit basis, homeownership projects were eligible for less funding than rental projects, this is no longer the case. Staff are proposing increasing the funding available to homeownership projects to match that of rental projects. So this is not a total funding pot split into just for homeownership and just rental, but rather a per unit calculation. So a single unit of rental or homeownership are eligible for the same amount of funding. We're going to continue to emphasize location efficiency, density, and service of low-income populations, while continuing to explore guidelines changes that support both rental and homeownership projects with those same objectives. Next slide, please. So in addition to the funding we have available for workforce development programming, AHSC also incentivizes workforce development practices in project construction. We're proposing adding an additional point within this category and increasing the number of strategies needed in order to receive those maximum points. So no longer one strategy to max out in this category, you now need 2. We worked with staff from the Office of Planning and Research to align these criteria with the state's High Road Partnership Guidance. And also want to note we received a lot of public comment on this section and really believe these current criteria work to maximize economic development potential of AHSC projects, which is as important as ever in light of the economic fallout of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Which also leads us into other adjustments made in response to COVID-19. We made changes and really took a deep dive into the AHSC guidelines in the hope that we can continue to aid both communities and project applicants in light of the various impacts being experienced and still expected. So one of which is aiming for continuity, trying to ensure projects did not become ineligible as a result of halts to transit service, and subsequently adjusting our eligibility for projects and eligible costs, ultimately supporting returns from transit providers to their pre-COVID level service cuts. We also we recognize that there's an increased reliance on at-home internet service, and in recognition of the governor's goal around eliminating the digital divide, we're proposing that all projects are built ready with internet access as a minimum requirement. We also added a new eligible program expense, as previously mentioned, for tenant legal counseling services, hoping that AHSC projects can help combat community displacement pressures of existing residents. And as we just mentioned, we underwent efforts to meaningfully create career pathways within AHSC projects by adjusting our workforce development incentives. The final change I want to touch is just extending our project construction timelines, which is aiming to account for the operational slowdowns expected across the workforce in basically all phases of AHSC project implementation. Next slide, please. So here's the details as to our round 6 guidelines updates so far in terms of process. As we touched on, stakeholders were recently informed of a delay to the final guidelines adoption and notice of funding availability release. While we're continuing to work diligently ensuring alignment with tax credit regulations, we just want to let stakeholders know we're going to stay attentive to their concerns, really putting that focus on the comments we've received. And that for future updates about our timeline, we just encourage you all to sign up for our AHSC listserv or visit the AHSC resources page on our SGC website. And we can head to the next slide. I just wanted to thank the council for listening and subsequently going to be listening to our public comment period. and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks, Louise. Lots of information and lots of attention, I think, to many things we're going to hear about on the regional allocation, on the greenhouse gas thresholds, and on the responses to COVID on transit and also timelines. So that's a lot. I'm anticipating we're going to get questions on when you think, like, will you reopen for public comment, when you think we might be bringing it back to the council for a vote. You may not be able to answer those, but I'm just wondering if you have anything to say on, I'm just anticipating we'll get asked that.
I mean, I can speak. I think we're open, I think, to whatever the best path seems like following today's conversation. And I think if we would like to open up another public comment period, that is a possibility. I think if we were able to sort of maintain a pace, we would love to be able to bring the guidelines back to the council in December. But I think it will depend on sort of the conclusion of today's meeting and where we're headed. So.
Great. No, that's helpful just to know that you don't have an immediate answer. I'm going to do, just to give everybody a sense of expectations, I'm going to do council member questions now, and then we're going to do a short break, and then we're going to do public comment. So I have Secretary Kim with his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Gordon and Ryan. Louise, thank you very much for your very thorough overview. Very high level question. I probably was not here when program guidelines were last updated, probably a couple of years ago. I wasn't here. Would you characterize this as a significant change in program guidelines or a modest adjustment?
Yeah, we definitely aim for consistency from round to round, which is something you saw in our COVID-19 adjustments, ensuring that we didn't all of a sudden eliminate projects as a result of our changes. So, some stakeholders may disagree. Overall, from my experience, I would classify a lot of these changes as just adjustments. We, aside from certain topics around geographic targets and minimum scores, which I do think are pretty substantial changes, as I think we'll hear about. But aside from those, I think our scoring changes, eligibility adjustments are, as I would say, folks can adjust any changes they need to make there.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And I'll just say that obviously these programs, as with all programs, administrative programs, change somewhat with changes of administration, so that there are some of those adjustments as well. Welcome, Secretary Crowfoot. Nice to see you. I have Vice Chair Plaid with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan, can you go over the ownership slide again? I didn't 100% catch it. What the change is or what the recommendation is?
Sure, and I've had a little difficulty trying to explain this, but essentially, just going to throw out broad numbers here. A home ownership project has units that are only eligible for a fixed funding amount, typically. That's about $50,000 per unit. Whereas rental units are eligible for an amount that's determined based on the affordability of the unit, the county it's located within, and that actually is much higher than homeownership units. So simply the change we made this round is to get away from that fixed assistance formula for homeownership units and to use the same formula for rental units. So now homeownership units will have their assistance calculated based on their location and the affordability of the unit, as well as unit size.
Great. No, I thought you did a great job and an outstanding job as always on a very complex topic. So thanks. Really appreciate the way you do what you do.
Thanks so much, Vice Chair. You guys are doing a great job of putting your hands up. Secretary Blumenfeld.
Hey, thanks everyone. Really appreciate everything that Luis and the entire team has done. And I know to the point that you're just making, Ryan, this is not easy stuff. So I guess the first question is, and this kind of piggybacks on what Secretary Castro Ramirez said, these are difficult times for many different reasons. And it kind of feels like at some level, these are a lot of changes to make to a program that felt, from where I sit, pretty successful. So when you look at the rationale for why we're trying to change it, I have to say that I'm not finding it incredibly compelling. So it feels like the main reason is geographic equity, and I get that, it makes sense. However, we had 20% of SGC's funding in this was discretionary, which kind of allowed us in the past to achieve the goals of geographic distribution. So I guess the highest and first priority that I would have, just as we think about principles, is twofold. One is equity, and the other is sustainability. And those are kind of the underpinnings of this money. The money obviously comes from GGRF, but it's for low income and disadvantaged communities. And so the regional approach, I think, has kind of philosophical merit, but the application of it is incredibly difficult. So as an example, if we have 8 regions, one of those regions includes LA and Orange County. LA alone has 52% of all the disadvantaged communities in the state. And so it gets to a place where when you're trying to tangle out how to prioritize all this, it feels like on some of the priorities that we're not getting to a place where we're going to be awarding the best projects when you look statewide, because we pick a regional approach. So by example, right now, AHSC is incredibly oversubscribed, and yet by the criteria we already have, and yet in this model, it feels like we would risk getting to a place where projects that have less high scores than projects that are currently backlisted or backlogged wouldn't get funded, and the less robust projects might. So lowering the project score thresholds, I don't think, during this time where we have very, very few dollars available, is something that we should be doing. The equitable distribution, I think, can be solved in different ways. Regionalism is one of them. I guess what I would find helpful from Louise and Ryan is an understanding, given I've been a big fan of this project from the day that I started on SGC. I'm still at odds of understanding exactly what it is in the changes, in terms of, if you were to list what priorities you're trying to solve through the changes in this, is it regional distribution and lack of that equity? Because on the pure serving disadvantaged communities and sustainability, I would say this is one of the best. The current model seems like one of the best models that we have for that. So I have to say that I'm not completely convinced that the regional targets make sense, moving towards a regional target. I just don't know. It does at a high level, but when you get into the weeds, I'm not sure how we can do it. And then, the GHG scoring, again, is incredibly complex. When we go through the project, the proposal as it's going to be structured, it feels like we have less potential for GHG reductions. And I just want to make sure, as we kind of articulated in the director's updates at the beginning, just aggressively tackling the climate crisis is obviously our goal, and collectively, and it happens to be that this is funded through GGRF. So I just want to make sure that we continue to, whatever this morphs into, score the projects and fund the projects that have the highest potential for GHG reductions. And when you do some of the geographic focus, some of those fall out the way that it seems to be structured at the moment. And then finally, on building electrification, just want to make sure that we're supporting the goals of moving towards fully decarbonized low-income and all-income houses. And just, this seems like a smaller point compared to the structural issues that I framed up earlier, but just wanting to make sure that we only see electric stoves for this round of guidelines, and for the next round 7, I don't think we should be funding gas homes through this project, specifically because this money is focused on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that fully electric homes designed from the beginning are about $9,000 to $10,000 less expensive and have significantly better indoor air quality. So I think in summary, I think we need to either look at the structure differently of how we do regional targets. I would love to understand, and maybe this, I think I might have missed this, so I apologize. It could easily be on me, but just kind of what exactly the problem is we're trying to solve, and then make sure that the GHG scoring remains its integrity, remains and continues to have the integrity that it's had throughout the long history of this program, which I think globally is something that we can point to as a really strong program. So I look forward to seeing the next iteration, and anything our teams can do at Cal EPA to work with you and continue to do that collaboratively, I will support vigorously. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Secretary Blumenfeld. I'm going to suggest that the broader philosophical question that you asked about the justification, that we hold on that conversation until after a bunch of public comment, just because we had a number of letters that go to that question. And I think it'd be good to wait and have that conversation after comment. I will say that there was one point you made that I think needs a clarification. I heard you say something about the thresholds being lowered for greenhouse gases. And that is, I think, actually the opposite of what happens. So I just wanted to get a point of clarification on that from Ryan or Louise.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note, we've never had scores. We've always had threshold requirements. We've never had score thresholds in previous rounds. We added them in this draft to maintain the focus on climate and greenhouse gas emission reductions. In GHG scoring, it actually is remaining the same 30 points available for GHG scoring that we've had in previous rounds, using the same calculator that CARB developed, actually updated over the same course of time. And so it does maintain that same integrity in terms of its focus on greenhouse gas emission reductions and the calculator that's being used.
Thanks, Louise. That's helpful. I have, and I know there will be comments on that point as well, because we've had letters on that point. I have Nicole with her hand up.
Thanks. I mean, now Jared has made me want to go into my own philosophical perspective here. And
which I think is totally fine. I was just making the
No,
point
no,
that
no.
instead of having Louise
No.
respond to each comment, I think we should
I'm not going to
give
follow
our
that
comments
example.
and then
I'm going to set
wait
the
for comment.
good example of the rest of the questions. So just to be clear, Ryan or Louise, the minimum score requirement, that's new. And that has, and I know this is maybe an unintended consequence, made the geographic diversity requirements moot for certain cities or certain regions that were being allocated a geographic award.
So I think that's honestly, it sounds like a very simple question. I think it's a very hard question to answer, and maybe traipses into our philosophical territory. But I think based on our analysis of previous rounds, they were set to, to sort of focus on the top 70% of projects. I think this is something we'll hear quite a bit in the public comment, is the perception of how difficult it will be to meet them in different parts of the state. And so, I think that is, and it's a hard sort of hypothetical to run without having the same set of projects round to round. But yeah, I mean, I think that's where a lot of our comments are coming in, is how those will play out in different places.
Right. Okay. And would you agree or disagree that equity is not just building, and this is a genuine question because I don't know what our guidelines say, is not just building in disadvantaged communities, but also serving disadvantaged populations? For example, there's a project, and I just happen to live in San Diego. I work in San Diego, so I'm familiar with some of the San Diego projects that have not won awards, but have submitted for winning. We have a project that is not in a disadvantaged community, but will be a permanent supportive housing project that was really hard to get approval, as you can imagine, in a suburban neighborhood, but close to transit. Is that considered an equitable project? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is it only in the communities where disadvantaged populations are kind of living, or is it what populations are being served by that housing?
Well, and this may also be, I mean, our understanding of our statutory direction is that 50% of our investments is in disadvantaged communities. That's how we have been operating per our statutory direction. And Doug or Ryan, please step in.
Yeah, I think recognizing that disadvantaged community is a place-based, census tract level measurement. We recognize that as measuring where our infrastructure investment is going. So, it doesn't quite allow us to measure households, which, low income groups we can measure for, but specifically for disadvantaged communities, it's not something we can measure on a household basis. So statutorily, we are required to do that measurement by at least as we interpret it, by our infrastructure investments.
Okay. And needless to say, my one comment, not question, is that I guess that would, to me, argue why geographic diversity is so important, because it's not always about where the affordable housing is located, but what populations are being served. But that's it. That's the only comment. And I thank you for letting me ask those questions.
No, that's extremely helpful. I will say again, I said this in the notes to the panelists that council members, I want to do just a 5-minute break. I know we have a lot of public comments that are really important, and I just really, I don't want to lose council members during the 5-minute break. So I'm counting on you to come back. But a 5-minute break, and this is not your only chance to weigh in. I just said I thought we should have more of the philosophical conversation after those comments. We can come back for council questions and comments after the public comment as well. So I just wanted to make that clear, because I think we'll hear from a number of places that these in which these changes would or would not have particular impacts, and I always think it's useful to be grounded in reality. So let's hear from folks. So I'm going to say it's 2:43. I'm going to say let's be back at 2:50. And then we will turn to public comment. Sandra, anything you want to say before we take the break regarding public comment?
Yes, please. Just one thing, Fabiha, if you can display the public comment instruction slide during the break so that anybody who hasn't yet signed up using our registration form to make a public comment can do so easily during the break. And then folks, if you did sign up to make a public comment, when we get back from the break, I'll read a list of all your names. That list will be in the order that we're going to call on you. So if you'd like, and if you know you already signed up for public comment and you'd like to raise your hand in Zoom at this time, so we'll be ready to unmute you when we get back from the break, that would be incredibly helpful. Use your raise hand setting in Zoom if you're online, and then if you're on the phone, you can use *9. So with that, let's have our break, yeah?
Thank you. 2:50. See you back then. You can take yourselves off camera during the break, and see you soon. Okay, folks, if you're in earshot, it's time to come back to your computer and turn your video back on. Look at that. Secretary Castro Ramirez is at the head of the class. Nicole is back. Perfect. Mike is back. Secretary Crowfoot, thank you. Julie, thank you. I think we're waiting for Amanda and Secretary Kim and Secretary Blumenfeld. Is that right? And Secretary Ross maybe too. Are any of you on and just not visible? Secretary Blumenfeld, thank you. Secretary Ross, thank you. Okay, I think we have enough folks back, and we weren't waiting for Amanda anymore because Secretary Crowfoot is here now. Actually, I just realized. So perfect. Okay, so I hope that during the break, folks, it looks like we got a couple of additional comments during the break. I had said at the outset that we would give 3 minutes per. I would love to allow that. Please do keep your comments below that if you can. But we will allow for that. And I think, Sandra, will you be lining up the speakers?
I certainly will. So are you ready for that?
I think so. And remind me, because I can't, my brain is a sieve. Am I responsible for the fun job of cutting people off, or, oh no, good, you have the timer. Perfect.
We have a timer. So you'll, you know, hopefully folks will stay within their time. And then if not, maybe you can thank folks so that they'll know their time is up.
I will do my best. All right, I'm ready.
Folks, and you'll say, then you'll hand them back off to me. So yeah, okay, everyone. Those of you who signed up and filled out a public comment form, you're on a list, and I'm going to call off your names momentarily to get yourself queued up. So let me do that step first. The folks, I have cards from are Scott Littlehale, Murtaza Baksamusa, Adrian Granda, Will Wright, Sally Greenspan, Michelle Kim, Amanda Hernandez, Jared Johnson, Seth Lichney, Natasha Reyes, Rebecca Merrill, Brian Elsey, Rebecca Louie, Edie Irons, Marcus Griffin, Laura Nunn, Ricky Wells, Alicia Sebastian, Mara Blitzer, Katie Ackerley, Victoria Wong, and Miriam Borgeson. So if I've just called your name and you are on Zoom on your computer, please use the raise hand function to raise your hand so we can find you and unmute you. If you're on the phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9. The order that I called on you is the order by which I will also introduce you to speak. So when your microphone is unmuted, you can just go ahead and begin your public comment. Again, keeping yourself within 3 minutes and if possible under, since we do have 22 comment cards. If you still want to make a comment and haven't yet submitted a comment card, you can do so at sgc.ca.gov. And there's a public comment form on our meetings page that you can fill out easily. And once you've completed your public comment, then we'll mute your phone line again, so you won't have to take any additional action. So
and
with
Sandra,
that,
I'm just going to urge everybody really to keep it, if you can, to 2 minutes. We'll actually formally go down to 2 minutes if we have to, but I would prefer not to. So if folks could keep it short, then gives everybody an opportunity to be heard. Thanks.
that makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much, Kate. Okay, so let's get started with Scott Littlehale with Northern California Carpenters Regional Council.
Thank you. Chair Gordon, members of the council, my name is Scott Littlehale. I am a representative of the Carpenters in Northern California, and we participated in the Round 6 Guidelines public comment process, along with a number of our partners from pre-apprenticeship programs run by both governmental and non-governmental agencies. We highlighted that CARB's funding guidelines for the agencies that administer California's climate investments require funding awardees to provide employment opportunities or job training tied to employment wherever possible, in particular, targeting opportunities to priority populations. Agencies were guided to prioritize investment in projects that develop or expand comprehensive agreements between labor unions and applicants and/or funding recipients. So the HSC's program's most obvious and significant opportunities to advance these objectives, particularly for priority populations, are construction jobs. Over half of construction workers' families statewide fit the definition of falling within a priority population. For example, about 2/3 of the LA Orange County metro area construction worker families fall below official thresholds for very low income or low income households. That's a percentage higher than is the case for non-construction families in that area. Unfortunately, prior rounds workforce development scoring criteria were vague. All projects awarded round 5 funds claimed full workforce points, all two, despite widely varying commitments. Fortunately, the final draft guidelines scoring criteria for local workforce development and hiring practices are much more meaningful and specific, and we were prepared to endorse that language today. But today we also face uncertainty about whether or not the new final draft language will be included in the applications going forward. This is important. Chair Gordon, in 2020, you co-authored a forward to a legislature-mandated report on strategies to ensure that the state's climate policies advance state workforce objectives. And you wrote, labor should be considered an investment rather than a cost, and investments in growing, diversifying, and upskilling California's workforce can positively affect returns on climate mitigation efforts. Unfortunately, scoring systems for tax credits and tax-exempt bonds are blind with respect to recognizing these important investments and leave affordable housing construction labor narrowly framed as a short-run cost. So it's important to harmonize the state's various funding program application processes, but it's critical to not eliminate incentives for affordable housing developers to make commitments that are meaningful and specific to construction workforce development. We seek the support of the Strategic Growth Council in using this language as a starting point in harmonizing applications. Thank you for listening to my comment, and I'll take questions if necessary.
Thanks so much, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Sandra?
Murtaza Baksamusa from San Diego Building Trades Family Housing Corporation.
Good afternoon, council members. Murtaza Baksamusa with the San Diego Building Trades Family Housing Corporation. Hello, council member Capretz. I speak today in 2 roles in terms of the workforce, echoing what Scott just talked about, as well as a potential applicant for our own project. First, I want to commend you for increasing the points for the local workforce development and aligning with the state's High Road Partnership guidelines, including criteria for stuff like partnerships with apprenticeship programs in terms of solar installation. These are high quality union apprenticeship programs that can be tapped by communities that need these jobs. As Chair Gordon said, the lowest paid workers are often our essential workers, and we need to be aware of that. Now, in terms of putting my owner applicant hat on, we are located in the San Diego region. The proposed GHG reduction scoring combines both the affordable housing and the transit components, the latter of which essentially serves as a proxy for the regional transit agency capacity in terms of delivering the results. This may undermine the objective for geographical diversity. Now, the purpose of an interagency team such as yours is to create demonstration projects and show what is possible. An exceptional performance in reducing greenhouse gas emissions or carbon footprint within the affordable housing project should be rewarded and made an exception. And that is kind of what I think you should be looking at. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thanks for modeling good behavior on keeping your comments short. Really appreciate it, and also just your comments on both you and Scott on workforce. Go ahead, Sandra.
Adrian Granda with City of San Diego.
Yeah, hi, Adrian Granda, Director of Government Affairs for the City of San Diego. Thank you all so much for really this considerate conversation. And, I don't envy you all for the number of different issues and priorities you're trying to balance with this program. It's extremely ambitious. So you'll always have a partner here at the City of San Diego and trying to, ensure that we're achieving all the goals, right? Nicole Cappert's, one of your board members, knows very well our commitment to climate as, being really one of the driving forces behind our climate action plan, which is quite revolutionary and sets really, really strict targets. So we are committed to GHG reductions here in the City of San Diego, and we're pushing the entire region to go in that way. The one thing I really want to get across is on the GHG targets being set as thresholds, as opposed to just part of the scoring criteria. Last time with the funding round 5, you heard from the region of San Diego a great deal of disappointment around not having any recommendations for award in our region. We are redoubling our efforts. We are redoubling our commitment to make sure we're competitive for the program. We're trying to be even more ambitious with our partnerships with our transit agencies and our MPOs to make sure we are competitive. But part of this exercise, I think, is looking at past performance and what's happened in some of the previous funding rounds. And while we share 100% the commitment to reduce greenhouse gases and be a meaningful partner in producing housing and hitting our RENA goals, right? Part of that is also making sure we're able to access the funds. So while the geographic targets were a huge step in the right direction, by making sure that certain regions that have less local funding to put forward and maybe don't have that trunk transit network to build off of, can be meaningful partners in helping to meet those goals and access these funds. So I think with the geographic targets were great, but these thresholds, looking at our GHG reduction scores from the applications from the San Diego region, really looks like it's going to disadvantage us and produce a real outcome potentially of us being shut out of yet another major funding round of $350 million. So I think we want to avoid that. I think we want to work with SGC staff and figure out different ways we can meet those goals, but also make these achievable, because we wouldn't want to see few regions that have a lot of local funding to invest continue to gobble up all the resources and see other geographic areas that don't quite have those resources be ineligible or not be able to tap into this very, very important investment and be meaningful partners in hitting climate and housing goals. So thank you for the consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it. Sandra?
Yes, Will Wright with AIA Los Angeles is next. We don't see Will on our list. Will, are you here? If you are, please raise your hand in the list. And Michael Jimenez, if you can keep an eye out for a hand that pops up here. Will Wright. I think we'll circle back at the end for Will and see if he arrives. So with that, the next person is Sally Greenspan, Enterprise Community Partners. Sally, are you here?
Yes, apparently I had double muted myself.
That happens. Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you to the council for the opportunity to give these comments today. My name is Sally Greenspan. I'm with Enterprise Community Partners, and I direct our AHSC Technical Assistance Practice, which to date has supported 73 awarded AHSC applications. And we are also currently working with dozens of potential round 6 applicant teams around the state. On behalf of Enterprise, I'd like to thank the staff across all the agencies that has worked so hard to integrate public input into the program guidelines again this year. And to this point, we would like to express our concern with the new minimum GHG thresholds. We believe these thresholds will prevent meaningful projects from applying, and that these thresholds are too high for the following reasons. First, we anticipate unprecedented challenges for applicants assembling the transit components of their projects this year due to the impacts of COVID-19 on the transit agencies. For this reason, it is extremely difficult to predict how a typical project will score on GHG reductions in this application cycle. Second, there have been other changes to the AHSC program this year that will negatively impact GHG scoring, including new policies around proration of transit vehicle purchase GHGs. And finally, we believe there is a common misperception that projects with lower GHG scores are lower quality applications. We frequently work with projects that have developed substantive, impactful AHSC application scopes that address all of the many co-benefits of the program and include meaningful transit components, but are simply located in smaller towns with less people, lower ridership, and therefore lower GHGs. We know that especially in these lower population areas, the transit investments funded by HSC often would not have otherwise been funded and the emissions not otherwise avoided. For this reason, we strongly urge the council to return to a score-based GHG threshold, also known as a dynamic threshold, as was proposed in the original draft AHSC guidelines. And lastly, we especially urge the council and staff to consider a lower GHG threshold only for those projects that are the subject of the new regional geographic targeting. This new section of the guidelines is an important step in creating geographic equity and responding to the natural variation between unique geographic conditions in our large state. Based on historical record of AHSC, we predict that a lower GHG threshold for regional geographic target projects would only apply to 2 to 4 applications per round and would thus have a relatively small impact on total AHSC program GHG reductions. And then in conclusion, I just want to say that achieving significant GHG reductions is very important to enterprise, and we strive to push our teams to achieve the highest GHG scores possible. And we also support AHSC scoring that continues to put significant emphasis on GHG reductions. However, we believe there is a way that AHSC can achieve the goals of both high GHG reductions and geographic diversity.
Thank you again so much, Sally. Really appreciate your comments. I would love, actually, I feel like there's still, at least in my mind, so I'm just assuming other people's too, maybe Louisa or Ryan, just a couple of minutes on the difference between the way GHG scoring was in the original draft guidelines, how it is in the current draft guidelines, just so everyone is on the same page as we listen to additional comments.
Yeah, I can cover that. So as Sally just mentioned, we moved away from this dynamic threshold, one done through a GHG score, towards one done through an absolute value of the estimate of GHG reductions. So yeah, dynamic versus absolute. So in the dynamic threshold, you get more certainty that the consistent number of applications each round will not be eligible because they fail to meet that minimum score requirement. With a static threshold, you have certainty at the time of application to a certain level, whether or not you meet that threshold. So that was the main reason we moved towards the static threshold, is greater certainty from applicants at the time of application or prior to application about whether or not they would meet this threshold. I do want to, though, acknowledge Sally Greenspan's comments that there are some changes we made to GHG scoring. The impacts to transit providers from COVID-19 are very real, and I guess communicate it as a tightening of purse strings from what we have heard, that there's less ability to meet AHSC's GHG reduction incentive. I think these may have been slightly overlooked, admittedly, when we move to this static threshold away from a dynamic threshold. But, again, our intentions were to provide more certainty to applicants prior to application with moving towards that static threshold.
Thanks, Ryan. And we'll come back and talk more about this. I just wanted clarity on what had happened, because I feel like we've heard various different characterizations of what happened, but that's really helpful to set the record. All right, Sandra, back to the comments.
Yes, is Michelle Kim with us? Michelle, if you're with us, please raise your hand. Yeah, I think we're not seeing Michelle yet, so we're going to move to Amanda Hernandez. Amanda, are you with us? And I think Amanda's also not here. And one more person who also may not be here is Jared Johnson, who's next on the list. Jared, are you with us? If so, please raise your hand so we can unmute your phone. Okay, we'll come back to those folks toward the end, and we'll move on now to Seth Lichney of Sandag. Seth, you might be double muted.
Okay, there, is that better?
There we go. Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, council members. I'm Seth Lichney, and I'm representing SANDAG, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the San Diego region. As a region of 3.3 million residents with the second largest city in California, we want to take advantage of the state's grant programs and see the needed greenhouse gas reductions occur in our region along with other regions of the state. We also play a supportive role for all applications in the San Diego region, which is why we wanted to provide comments today. We appreciate the changes that were initially made to the Round 6 AHSC guidelines, encouraging greater geographic distribution of the funds, especially the potential funds in the San Diego region. And although we were not awarded any AHSC funds in the previous round, the guideline amendments renewed a sense of optimism in the ability of projects in San Diego to compete for the funds. For the past few months, we've discussed potential applications with developers and cities, and we think those applications would meet the requirements of the AHSC program. However, the changes in the final draft have raised some concerns about the ability of the projects to compete. We're in the process of evaluating the changes to the guidelines and how they may affect potential applications in our region. And as has been discussed today, our particular concern is the minimum greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and their application to the geographic distribution of the funds. We appreciate the delay of the Strategic Growth Council's vote to finalize the guidelines, and we'll use this time to provide comments on the final draft. And we will also continue to relay our concerns to Councilmember Nicole Capretz, Executive Director Louise Bedsworth, and the SGC staff. And we always thank them for their willingness to meet with us and discuss the AHSC and other grant programs. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks so much, Seth. Really appreciate your comments. Sandra?
Yes, thanks. Next on the list, we found Jared Johnson, and he is under Michael Jimenez Actera staff. So if you can unmute Actera staff for Jared Johnson with Actera.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I think we didn't have the option to change our names within the Zoom call. But I'm a Bay Area resident, a policy fellow for Actera, and on behalf of my organization, I urge the SGC to increase AHCH application points for all electric buildings this year, and most importantly, make a clear public comment to only consider all electric buildings in the next funding cycle. I've lived on the East Coast now, so this is my first time through a wildfire season, being on the West Coast for the first time. I've been working on climate issues for a long time, so I know, California's warmer, drier climate has caused an exacerbation of wildfire risk, but actually living through it, fearing that my coworkers could lose their homes, being forced to buy air purifier and N95 masks and make it through the day, this really has changed my perspective on it. And without a doubt, California is in a climate emergency. We must stop throwing gas in the flames. Millions of people are breathing and smoking unhealthy air. At least 7 people passed away from the wildfires, probably way more now. And over 130,000 people have been evacuated. Over 1,500 structures have been destroyed by the wildfires. So we really need to do whatever we can to adapt and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but allowing for the development of new gas-dependent infrastructure only make it harder for us to fully decarbonize. Now, we also know that the need or that climate change will more deeply affect low-income individuals, and building affordable housing projects with gas hookups will have unintended negative consequences on equity and health. Forcing folks to live in gas-powered units exposes them to higher levels of indoor air pollution. During emergencies, it takes longer to get power back on to homes that are powered by gas as opposed to electric homes. And most importantly, as the price of renewables continues to drop, fossil fuels become more expensive. So living in those units with gas hookups will end up costing the tenants more and energy costs not less. And lastly, electric homes are cheaper to build. So with smart planning, you can actually increase the amount of development for low-income housing. The CEC's build program created by SB 1477 will launch in 2021 and provide $60 million in direct incentives and robust technical support for all new electric affordable housing. this is a well-timed support for the change in HCH guidelines in 2021. The affordable housing community is already getting started moving all electric, and the council making a strong, clear public commitment can only help. A strong, clear public commitment for all electric buildings in the next funding cycle can only help to further push that momentum.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. And thanks for calling in. Sandra.
Natasha Reyes, Disability Rights California.
Hello, thank you. So I'm Natasha Reyes with Disability Rights California, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today on the guidelines. We've already provided written comments, so I'll focus on just a few main points. First off, with accessibility of the projects, we ask that AHSC and the council clearly outline development requirements for units accessible to people with disabilities. We've provided proposed text in our written comments, and we'd like to express appreciation for HCD's decision to hold off on voting on this and several other programs while TCAC and CIDLAC review changes to their own program. Currently, TCAC is proposing to increase accessible development requirements in new construction. And so with a total of nearly 6 million income eligible households with a member who has a disability requiring accessible features, we urge the Strategic Growth Council to do the same to increase their accessible development requirements. And to add, one of the members earlier mentioned the obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, and this increase in accessible development would support that obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. I'll close and just say that DRC remains available for further consultation on issues of accessibility in this program. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We very much appreciate the opportunity to comment today. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Appreciate it. Sandra?
Rebecca Merrill, City of Barstow.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Council, for hearing from us. I'm a contract city planner and half of our city HSC team. I am really grateful to Sally Greenspan, who earlier essentially put our city's situation in perspective. We are a small city. We don't have trunk transit, so light rail, and we don't have a large population. So originally we were counting on CalVans to easily put us over the 7,200 GHG score, but it's possible that CalVans might not be renewing its contract in the county that we reside in. And so the GHG score would be difficult to reach without the addition of CalVans, and we'd like you to consider possibly having two scoring sections, one with communities rural communities with CalVans, and one without CalVans for rural communities. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your comments, Rebecca. Really appreciate it. Sandra.
Brian Elsie with LZ Holdings, please.
Yes, this is Brian Elsie. I'm a private real estate developer, and we are proposing a affordable supportive housing project at 2111 Firestone Boulevard in unincorporated LA County. We're also working with Enterprise Group, and I just want to speak briefly on the new GHG requirements that was already mentioned previously. Those requirements would basically kill our project. We wouldn't be able to qualify, and really the only way we could do that, we are building 85 units and we're basically built in lot line to lot line, and the structure's 6 stories tall. We would have to almost double the amount of units that we have on our site to to be able to qualify, which isn't feasible with the zoning. And we're within a half-mile of a transit stop. We're in a very densely populated area, but because we don't have some of the transit scores, I think we'd have to add like 5 city buses to be able to qualify. So the new GHG scoring just isn't, it's not an attainable goal for us in our project. And so it would eliminate it from the consideration. So I think the enterprise folks, I'd sent a letter as well. I think there might only be 2 or 3 projects that would qualify under these new regulations. So this is our very first affordable housing project that we've done. We've always done market rate development, and so we're learning a lot, but it was kind of discouraging to look at these rules and with all of our consultants with this new stuff coming down that our project wouldn't be able to qualify. So that's all I wanted to really mention. Another thing, this is just some food for thought, just the cost of affordable housing. I can't believe how expensive it is. I'm doing a multi-family development next to USC that's market rate. It's got 2 and 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom units, very nice finishes. We're vertically integrated. So we design, build, and manage all of our properties. So we know how to build projects, and it's like $300,000 a unit. And all these affordable housing projects are $400,000 to $500,000 a unit. And so something is not right with the system if it costs $400,000 to $500,000 to build a comparable unit in affordable housing. So those are my comments. Thanks for taking my time.
Thanks, Brian, and appreciate you sharing some of those details. I'm sure Secretary Castro Ramirez knows the numbers by heart, but I don't know that many others of us do. So really appreciate that. Sandra?
Edie Irons with Transform.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can, Edie, thank you.
Great. And I don't know how to turn on my video, but I'm sorry you can't see me. I just wanted to echo the concerns that you're already hearing about the greenhouse gas thresholds and the resulting impacts on the geographic distribution changes that we also support, and definitely do want to echo also the thanks for all your work on this. But we are concerned that the thresholds, especially given the effects of the pandemic, could discourage strong, impactful projects like the ones we've been hearing about today from applying and winning HSC funds, and also that it might undermine the geographic equity goals that we share. So we support Enterprise's comments and proposed solutions to the issue. Sorry, I'm trying to shorten my comments for you a little bit. The score-based threshold that Enterprise, Sally Greenspan suggested would ensure that a proportion of all the applications pass the threshold and can win funds. So, because of those other changes made to the weighting of subcomponents of the GHG score this year, a score-based threshold would rely less on transit and more on some of the housing, active transportation, and solar aspects of the greenhouse gas score. We also would agree that it might be worth waiving the threshold entirely, or considering a lower threshold for those projects that would be subject to the new geographic targets policy. And again, that would just be a relatively few projects, but I think those projects have an outsized importance in their regions, and we would really love to see that geographic diversity. And just in closing, Transform, it has climate in our mission, and greenhouse gas reductions are incredibly important, and so we support your strong emphasis on that in this program. But the HSC program serves so many important purposes around equity, around housing, affordability, transit ridership, and access. This is a really wonderfully unique program, and so we hope that you'll balance all the needs of the programs against the need, alongside the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thanks, Edie. And can you just tell us where Transform is based? I think it's the Bay Area, right? We've lost Edie. I think Oakland. Am I right about that?
Yeah,
Great.
Transform is in Oakland.
Just always good to hear where people are calling in from geographically. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, the next person on the list is Marcus Griffin, but I think Marcus has stepped away. Marcus, if you're still with us, raise your hand again and we'll come back to you. Laura Nunn with San Diego Housing Federation is up next. And I think you're double muted, Laura.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chair Gordon and members of the Strategic Growth Council. My name is Laura Nunn, and I'm calling today on behalf of the San Diego Housing Federation. To begin, I would like to thank SGC Executive Director Louise Bedsworth and AHSC Program Manager Ryan Silber for their work over the past few months to listen to feedback and suggestions from the San Diego Housing Federation and our members. I'm calling today to share our concerns about the minimum GHG threshold requirements that have been included in the most recent version of the guidelines, and ask that the SGC formally reopen public comment to these proposed changes. In our July 23rd letter to the SGC, we shared our concerns about the equitable distribution of AHSC funds statewide, noting that San Diego has received about 5% of total funding awards in the past 5 funding rounds, despite representing 8% of the state's population. We were very pleased to see our recommendation for geographic allocations included in the draft guidelines, and thank SGC leadership for taking our concerns into account by including this language. Unfortunately, as you've heard, the most recent addition of language related to minimum GHG reduction threshold once again places the San Diego region at a serious disadvantage to compete for AHSC funds and undermines the intent behind the geographic allocations. The San Diego Housing Federation and its members support the SGC's goals with the ASIC program and eagerly wants to participate in advancing those goals. To do so, we request further consideration of the guidelines and how AHSC funds can be distributed equitably to communities throughout California. And I also would like to add that just to build upon Councilmember Capret's comments about the location of where these funds are spent, we expressed in our letters earlier just kind of our recommendations around working to better align program mandates as it relates to expenditures in disadvantaged communities and also advancing the state's affirmatively furthering fair housing goals. And so we hope that you'll continue to work to make alignment around those items. Thank you for consideration of these comments, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Laura. Really appreciate your comments. Sandra.
Ricky Wells with BART. Ricky, it looks like you're unmuted and ready to go. Michael, has Ricky been unmuted?
Ricky has been unmuted. Ricky, are you there?
Thanks. Michael, maybe we can troubleshoot with Ricky and then we'll come back around and capture that public comment if they'd still like to make it. So let's move on to Alicia Sebastian with California Coalition for Rural Housing.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Alicia.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Yes, my name is Alicia Sebastian. I'm the Associate Director of the California Coalition for Rural Housing. CCRH is also a member of the Rural Smart Growth Task Force. CCRH members serve rural, farm worker, and American Indian tribal communities, and over half of our members also develop in urban areas. We're grateful for the ongoing opportunity to serve as technical assistance providers alongside others on the enterprise team. We thank SGC, HCD, and ARB for their ongoing partnership. We value our history of working together to create an impactful program. And we'd especially like to thank the staff at ARB and SGC for the many meetings, conversations, and ongoing communication during the guideline process regarding our community's concerns and potential solutions for this program. We're grateful to see the geographic targets included in the round 6 proposed guidelines, and we're grateful to see many of our suggestions and feedback on the draft guidelines included in the proposed final guidelines. However, we share concern with our partners at Enterprise and others across the state about the new minimum GHG reduction thresholds. We are concerned that these thresholds are too high and that they will discourage strong, impactful projects from applying to AHSC, and that these thresholds will undermine the goals of the geographic targets. The thresholds, based on last year's GHG performance and relying on significant GHG contributions from transit components, will be harder for all projects to reach this year in light of the difficulties that transit agencies face due to COVID-19, as well as other changes to guidelines and GHG quantification methodology as referenced from our partners, Barstow and Calvans. We have particular concern about rural communities and mid-sized cities in places like the Central Coast, the San Joaquin Valley, and other inland areas, and many of our most underserved communities struggling for equitable access to these critical resources. We know that, unlike other areas of the state, without AHSC funding, these projects will not move forward. Instead, we recommend SGC replace this proposed threshold with a score-based GHG threshold set at around 6 points. In such a critical time to address health disparities and racial inequities, we do not want to waste an opportunity to make real change where it is needed most. We look forward to the opportunity to continue our partnership and address these concerns with the state and stakeholders as we work together to ensure that AHSC helps all of California's regions meet the state's climate goals. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Sandra?
Mara Blitzer with San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing, please. Oh, I think you're double muted, Mara.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Blitzer. I am the Director of Housing Development at the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. And after many years of commenting, this is the first time I've commented in person, so to speak. I want to thank you so much for making this an opportunity. It has been really quite a dramatic week in the world of affordable housing finance. And so it's great to have this opportunity. And we are, of course, very grateful to all of you and your support of affordable housing in California through this program. We have benefited from the program in the past and certainly hope to do so in the future. And one of the reasons why we wanted to comment today, we very rarely make comments on final guidelines. In fact, I think this is the first time that we have, but we are particularly concerned about the issue of the static application threshold for GHG reductions. And I think I really appreciate the intent of making it more certain in the application process. That's so important for us that are developing affordable housing, like having the certainty. There's so many pieces that need to get lined up at the same time for an affordable housing development to go forward. It's very difficult, but I think that the dynamic threshold, particularly in this year of pandemic, when the world is really upside down, it's very, very difficult to predict anything. And so to set such a high bar, a really high threshold doesn't seem appropriate for this year. I could understand if it was not a pandemic year, but right now it doesn't seem like the right direction. And so we're here to ask you to make a change at the last minute to please either go back to the static application where you're giving points, those 6 points, or change the threshold to make it lower. To be blunt, we don't think this is going to result in lesser applications. They will result still in applications that you all will be really proud of, and we will as well. But I think it will certainly discourage high quality projects from applying. And I think now is not the time to be discouraging affordable housing developments for applying for state funding. I think also to add a small plug for the process of some alignment with CIVLAC and TCAC. We have a project that has an AHSD award that is potentially going to not receive a bond allocation because of misalignment between the different agencies. So we're pleased and grateful to you for taking a little bit of time to align. And I think particularly on the AFFH on fair housing and whether we are investing in communities that have traditionally been underserved is really important. So we're grateful to you for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. Really appreciate those comments, and thanks for commenting. Now you can become a regular SGC commenter now that you've done it once. Back to Sandra.
Yes, Victoria Wong with Mid-Penn Housing Corporation.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. My name is Victoria Wong, and I'm a project manager with Mid-Penn Housing. Thank you for providing the opportunity to provide public comments on final draft regulations for round 6. And thank you to staff for reviewing and implementing important changes in response to some of the public comments we've submitted. I'm here to comment on the new minimum greenhouse gas reduction thresholds by project type included in the final draft guidelines. Like many who have spoken today, we are concerned that these thresholds are too high and will prohibit important and much needed projects from applying and being awarded HSC funds. This minimum requirement in order to apply will be challenging for projects to meet. Many transit agencies are experiencing decreased ridership and other challenges as a result of COVID-19. These thresholds will create more inequities in what projects are funded and where funds are invested. We ask that the council not adopt this minimum threshold requirement and instead for the council to either reduce the thresholds or replace the proposed threshold with a score-based GHG threshold for HSC round 6. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks for keeping those comments brief. Really appreciate you. Sandra?
Marion Borgeson with NRDC.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Gordon and council members. This is Marion Borgeson with NRDC. Just wanted to speak in strong support of the proposal that was made today to offer ASIC points for all electric construction. And I was delighted to see the public commitment today that all electric buildings will be required in future rounds. We see this as a really important and meaningful step forward. And I just want to thank you for your leadership on this. I also want to urge you to take the step in this round to disallow gas combustion inside homes and apartments, including for cooking. And Secretary Blumenfeld made a request for this earlier in the meeting, and we strongly support adding this change to the guidelines this round. So that would be an additional change we'd love to see. But overall, just like really delighted with your guys' willingness to engage on this issue and be responsive and really take a leadership role. So thanks so much for all your work.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks for your work in this space as well. We appreciate it. Sandra.
Gracia Lenes with Leadership Council.
Hi, I'm hoping I can be heard.
You can. Thank
you.
Okay,
Yes, we
great.
can.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon and members of the Strategic Growth Council. My name is Gracia Lenes with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We are a nonprofit working alongside community members in the Eastern Coachella and Central Valleys. I want to first appreciate staff's ongoing time and work on this program to ensure its success across California. We are very grateful for their willingness to work and meet with us to ensure that HSC is a program that supports and allows rural applications to be competitive and, most importantly, actually be awarded. I won't take much of your time and will reverberate what our partners at Enterprise and the California Coalition for Rural Housing, amongst others, have already expressed around the new GHG reduction threshold. I think we can all agree on how important reducing GHGs are in reaching California's climate goals. However, competing with these objectives is the current housing crisis exacerbated by the current pandemic. As it's been noted, we fear these changes will exclude entire regions of California who entirely rely on these funds oftentimes to build some type of housing. Now, these regions already are gravely underserved, not just by housing access, but also clean drinking water, wastewater services, transit and active transportation access, and so on. And oftentimes, these very projects that happen in their community are the catalyzing agents that these communities so gravely need to see all of this happen. Now, in a time when the pandemic has shed a very, very bright light on the stark inequities between the haves and the have-nots, it should be the duty and objective of every agency at every level of government to break down those barriers, dismantle the systemic racist inequities, and ensure we do not continue perpetuating past investment patterns, and make sure we are allowing communities to apply competitively. And right now we feel the current changes do not permit that. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gracia, for those comments. Sandra?
Yeah, Shannon Dodge is next from BART, and Shannon's going to speak on behalf of their colleague, Ricky Wells at BART as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. My name is Shannon Dodge, and I'm with BART in Oakland. BART is extremely grateful for our partnership with SGC on past projects, which have been in a variety of communities, both urban and suburban. And in response to the draft guidelines issued in September, BART submitted comments along with several other agencies, with our key request being that SGC restore the transit points for GHGs in lieu of the newly proposed transit improvement points. So I'm primarily here to thank you very much for restoring those transit points for GHG reductions. These points really help the HSC program maximize its effectiveness in addressing our climate crisis. And BART also supports the change that only transit vehicles purchased with AHSC funds and not those purchased with leveraged funds be counted for the purpose of GHG points. Even though we have benefited from the old way things were interpreted, we think this is actually a more fair approach. Others have commented quite a bit on the threshold, so I'm not going to add to that. And really, BART looks forward to future collaboration with SGC to significantly reduce GHGs in California. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate your comments. Sandra, how many folks do we have left?
One more on the list, and then I'll circle back up to the top just to capture anybody who may not have been able to connect when we called on them. So the last person on the list is Tim Frank with Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm with the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods, and we support policies and projects that help build sustainable neighborhoods and regions. And we do this throughout the state in both rural and in urban areas, and are very interested in making sure that there are solution sets available for projects across the full range of geographic types. So we concur with, and I should note, also participate in the Rural Smart Growth Working Group. So I think mostly I can confine my remarks to referencing the work that other people have already said. I think Sally from Enterprise actually did a very good job of articulating the case for a shift from the current thresholds towards a score-based approach, and we think that's a good solution. And would support the idea of making sure that at least that is available to projects that are needed to achieve the geographic targeting goals. The second thing I'd like to comment on was also covered by somebody else, Scott Littlehale. We've been looking at the challenge of building housing in California, not just affordable housing, but market rate housing too. California has a huge shortfall of housing, and to address that need, we clearly need to build the workforce to be able to actually get the construction going to build the homes. And I think it's really important that we take the opportunity to reward projects with points that are employing best practices in workforce development. And I think that the inclusion of points for that in the system is an excellent idea. So we commend you for that. Thank you. And that's it.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate your comments. Sandra.
Yes, so we've now gone through the whole list and called on everyone who had signed up to make a public comment, but it's so important to us to hear from everybody who did want to make a public comment on this item. So I just want to run back through the list for the people who didn't connect when we called on them before and make sure if they are here, they have an opportunity to speak. So if I call you and you're still here, please raise your hand using Zoom or pressing *9 if you're on the phone. Will Wright, Michelle Kim, Amanda Hernandez, Rebecca Louie, Marcus Griffin, or Katie Ackerley. If any of those folks are here, just raise your hand. And it's looking like they're not. So in the meantime, I just want to ask if there's anybody else who hasn't yet made a comment on this item, but who wanted to do so, please raise your hand and we'll unmute your microphone. And I'll just give a few seconds for people to respond to that. Okay, Kate, I'm seeing none. So I think we can conclude public comment.
Great, thank you. And thanks to everybody who stayed on and made comments, and really also for being good about sticking to under 3 minutes, because we were all a little nervous about the 3-minute thing after I said it. So now my son is having his piano lesson, just so you know what's happening behind me. So thank you. I wanted to give, as I promised, a chance to go back to the council, really to kind of talk through some of the things we've just heard. I think as we said at the beginning, we aren't going to be voting on the guidelines today. I think we will want to go back to staff and think through, as some people asked for, additional public comment period and timeline. But I wanted to go back to Secretary Blumenfeld's kind of points that he raised earlier, the kind of the philosophical or the question on why regional diversity, why geographic targets, what's the underlying theory of that. And I have a thought on that, but I'm gonna first defer to others to weigh in on that question or anything else that you've heard, or ask any questions to staff based on what you've heard. So I'm looking for hands. As always, looking for hands. I'm not seeing hands at the moment. I'll just say, since I'm not seeing hands yet, and please do weigh in. You know, from my perspective, one of the values of the Strategic Growth Council programs is that they're demonstrations of what we mean when we talk about sustainable, inclusive, communities, when we talk about how to think about all the different benefits of reduced driving, access to transit, access to jobs and services, lower pollution, all of these things coming together in specific projects. And I think my simplistic answer, Secretary Blumenfeld, maybe to your question is, shouldn't we be able to show that in every part of the state? I think it actually really helps us as a state, politically, practically, from a policy perspective, to be able to say, these are not just projects that exist in specific parts of the state, specific types of cities, specific types of communities, but they really exist and can exist everywhere. And SGC has gone a long way toward that with the rural approach and other approaches, but it really does strike me that speaks directly to the governor's focus on regional equity and just the need to recognize the regional diversity of this huge state that we're in. So that would be my kind of take on your question, but I see you have your hand up, Secretary Blumenfeld, so I will go back to you.
First of all, thank you, Chair Gordon. I mean, this is an extraordinarily difficult thing to balance. I guess what I would say, first of all, is we have very limited funding, and that it kind of feels like a more difficult discussion because we're talking from a place of scarcity. If we had a lot of resources to do affordable housing, it would be an easier discussion. And as you and I have discussed in other areas, like the GGRF funding is stretched 1,000 different ways, is sliced and diced. It just happens that the last large chunk of money left on the table comes from the cap and trade revenues, and there's specific criteria about how those are used. I mean, if we were having just a discussion about sustainable, affordable housing, I'd be like, all this makes complete sense. But given that we have limited money, given that, that from my perspective, I'll just put it out there, the goal is to help the most disadvantaged communities and to reduce as much GHG as possible. Those are the goals, because in both those cases, we want to help the communities that need the help the most. And secondly, as we all know, our fight to defeat climate change requires reducing as much GHG as we can. So those, I think I raised at the beginning, and I think this could still be a helpful exercise. What we're trying to do in this discussion really is deal with competing priorities. And I know that it's been tough, but I do think we're kind of backing into the place where we still need a strategic plan, which is, what are the highest level priorities that we have as a group? How do they manifest themselves in policy? Because in each policy, I think we need to kind of keep our eye on the North Star and move towards it. And yes, does my heart go out, when we heard from Sally from Enterprise that there's small communities that want to participate? Yeah, we want to help any way we can, but do we have the money to do that when we're prioritizing really severely disadvantaged communities across our state? My take is that we don't. So I believe that we can probably get to a place where we have regional, a kind of hybrid regional approach where we do look at making sure there is that regional balance, but at the same time, irrespective of how you do the scoring regionally, and what the threshold is, we're going to get higher scoring. And this was the point I was trying to make, Kate, higher scoring if you do statewide. So the percentile of what projects we're going to pick are necessarily going to be higher when you do a statewide poll than when you do a region by region poll, because the net pool of projects that you're competing within changes, no matter what that threshold is, and so we can get into that. I don't think that's a useful topic right now. I would just say I think CARB and folks within Cal EPA agency are really happy to try and between now and the next meeting continue to work through some of these and try and reach a point of balance, because I think we can get there, but it was tough, and I appreciate Luis pulling it so that we have a bit more time. And I think the public comment that we heard is useful.
Thanks, Secretary Blumenfeld. Appreciate that. Secretary, sure, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to clarify one thing. I just want to make sure we're that we would not score projects within a region. That's not what we're suggesting. We would continue to look statewide and score the same way that we have. So we would go project area type, so TOD.
No, that's helpful. I didn't get that. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I just really, so that the regional targets would come in behind that. So you would still get the best projects statewide in each project area type, and the regional target would really come in after that, if that helps.
So Louise, to clarify that, so I had the same clarification, and it's super helpful. We're also talking about ensuring that there is one project in each of the 8 regions. So let's say you do the statewide allocation like you normally do. And then if you were like, 2 regions have no projects, would you then come in and look at the projects closest to the line from those regions? How would that work?
Ryan, Ryan has sort of mapped it out in a more cogent way than I can probably explain.
Yeah, I think probably a starting point would be just picking up on something we heard in public comment, that this would likely only affect these geographic targets 2, at most 4 projects each round. The majority of our funding is going to continue to be distributed in the same way it has in previous rounds, which is through the statewide competitive process. After going through that, the allocation of that first roughly 80% of funding, we will then look at our geographic targets and try to ensure that every of those 8 geographies has at least 1 award, as long as they can meet our minimum requirements, which I think at this point, the point of contention are those minimum GHG requirements. So again, I think we're just looking at this, if you all are familiar with our past processes, this discretionary funding pot, how we allocate that. And if we do end up needing closer to 4 projects, we may then have to go outside of that discretionary pot and take away what were initially the lowest scoring projects identified for award.
So Ryan, really what we're hearing in public comment is a concern that after that statewide approach, if you have a couple of projects that are in regions that have not gotten any projects under that initial statewide approach, the concern we're hearing is that if we also have the overlay of the existing static greenhouse gas requirement, then that would continue to keep those projects out of contention, that you'd basically negate, somebody said, the regional approach if we keep that target where it is. Is that right? Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Yeah. Okay, that was super helpful. Secretary Kim?
Thank you, Chair Gordon. I will admit that I am still getting my arms around this very complicated program, the nuts and bolts of it, but a couple of points. To the extent minimum GHG thresholds cannot be met or are unattainable because of the fact that transit agencies are struggling. In fact, as we all know, they are fighting for their survival. That is a very important consideration. That's going to enter into my calculation as we proceed to a decision at the next meeting. Second point, I am very sympathetic to the point made by the public speaker from Barstow To the extent regional targets would help communities like Barstow increase their odds of getting a grant, that's going to enter into my calculation as well. I'm still going to take the time between now and the next meeting to learn more about the nuts and bolts of the program and make sure I fully understand it. But I just wanted to make those comments for the time being. Thanks.
Thanks, Secretary Kim. Appreciate that. And you're right, it is a complex program with many parts, and many of us don't understand housing finance, so that's also hard. I'm not seeing hands. I know some of you have a hard time raising hands. Oh, Nicole Capritz has her hand up. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks. It is hard to put my hands as well around the complexity of this scoring process. I would just continue to argue that I think San Diego has shown up in a pretty material way today, made a powerful case, compelling case about why we have been at the bottom end of all allocations of all rounds. That doesn't seem fair or justified. And it is true that traditionally we have not invested in transit in the way that other regions like the Bay Area or Los Angeles has. That is true. But we can't really be punished for that because the goal is to move us in a new direction, which everyone knows we're going in. We have really ambitious plans, not only around climate, but also around public transportation. Probably bigger plans than any other region in the state of California is what's on the table and likely to move forward. And so at some point, that's why I think the geographic allocations are pivotal, because they're also recognized, they're also future looking, forward looking, not just looking in the past, because we are already behind. We can't even start, we're not starting on level playing fields as regions. So I don't, again, I don't have the magic answer. I don't have the perfect solution. So I don't want to suggest I do. I want that to at least be considered, that, here we are stepping up whatever, we're in transition with mayors, but we had a previous mayor who really did move the needle on affordable infill and this new transportation vision. We have a new mayor who's going to be hopefully implementing that in a more meaningful way. But it's like that has to be rewarded in some way, because we've also taken on NIMBYs. We've taken on like really powerful interests to do the right thing, and that has to be acknowledged and hopefully awarded. And so it sort of irks me to hear like, oops, well, sorry if you don't get any money. Like that's it. It's going to the Bay Area and LA. I mean, there's also, and this is completely impolitic to say, none of the secretaries that I know live in San Diego. So it's like, I think there's also a bias for Northern California because no one lives where we do. Like no one experiences our, how things are going here. So I think it's just challenging because we're fighting for our voice to be heard. We're fighting for our region to be acknowledged and respected. And, I guess I'm just, I'm not articulating it as beautifully as I would like to, but I think you're hearing the frustration that you've heard eloquently from so many speakers. And so I just, again, really want to reinforce why I think the geographic allocations are really important and fair at the same time.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that perspective and passion as well. I have Secretary Crowfoot with his hand up.
Thanks so much. I'm listening carefully, and I had an unplanned childcare pickup, so I'm actually in transit, so I can't be on the screen. But, listen, I actually respectfully disagree with, Commissioner Capritz. I actually don't think this is about geographic bias. I think this is about balancing a challenging set of issues with limited funding. And I think the real tragedy here is that, the public comments we're hearing are coming from communities that want to build affordable housing, that want to do more projects to maintain the affordability of their communities. And, whether that's Barstow or San Diego or, Metro Los Angeles, it's a tragedy that, there's not more funding to actually be able to disperse. So I'm a little bit, I characterize myself with, sort of where Secretary Kim is. I need to, with my colleague Amanda Hansen, really better understand the ins and outs of what's being proposed. I think all of our council members make really good points about different ways to approach this. I also think we are dealing with, a sizable but limited amount of funding. And I think as Ryan demonstrated that it sounds like, there's the statewide scoring system is largely intact. The question is, do we just complement that with some regional distribution? So I don't have a strong position at this point, and we'll use the time that we've been given to form an opinion in coming weeks.
Thanks so much, Secretary Crowfoot. Appreciate it. And we all, I think many of us have been there with various family or household issues coming up in the middle of our Zoom calls. So we feel for you. I have, and if folks can lower their hands who have spoken, I have Mike Flad with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made already, so I don't want to try to overstate those. But yeah, scarcity of resources is what, again, agreeing with other comments, is what I see as one of the toughest issues here. Anytime we are trying to balance competing values like regional equity and our climate goals, we're going to have good discussion. I appreciate all the members of the public that took the time to come out and participate. It does truly influence our thinking, so really value that. And again, want to reiterate that I value the work that is done by staff to constantly try to tweak and make these processes better. I've just never seen anything like it in the programs that I've worked on. So really want to point that out. I don't, that word bias strikes a chord with me. I don't think it's in maybe intentional bias or that there's actual bias. I think and I've been on the council for a little bit here, and the procedures and the process that I've seen has been with the goals of trying to meet all of the climate goals that are our core mission. And if there are sort of regional or perceived regional inequities that have resulted as the goals have, as one of our competing values has been given more emphasis, maybe we need to look at that. And that's what I think the purposes of this discussion and what we're looking at now. But I did have one question. So with regard to there was comments, a couple different comments about stoves and electrification. Where is that in the current change, or so where are we with the electrification as it stands right now, and then what's being proposed?
Louise, do you want to go do that?
So in the current draft of the guidelines, we've added 2 additional points for all electric building design. So it brings sort of the bucket of green building points up to 10. And that also includes green building certification and some other components. So that's what we have done in this current draft. I think we heard from Secretary Blumenfeld, as well as from Marion from Natural Resources Defense Council, and the speaker from Arcterra around the recommendation on not allowing gas stoves or gas combustion appliances in living spaces. And so that's under consideration, but is not in the current draft.
Okay, well, I just want to. Oh.
Sorry, I was going to say it also signals a move towards all electric requirements in future rounds.
So I just, if now's the appropriate time to articulate that, I would be supportive of that. And then also thankful that we're going to get a little more time so I can get deeper into the details on everything we've discussed. And the last comment I'll make, Chair Gordon, is just in support of your comment with regard to one of the geographic equity benefits is a greater awareness statewide of what we're trying to accomplish here. And Strategic Growth Council still is a bit of a black box for a lot of the folks, and a lot of especially at my level, at the city level, it's still a great unknown. And the more we can spread our projects, the more we put environmental issues on the front page at the local government level. And I'll stop talking. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to briefly clarify, just because it's come up a couple of times, that there's this tension, and I wanted to say to my own comments, to me, it's not really a tension between regional equity and greenhouse gas reductions. We as a state under SB 375 and this sustainable community strategy actually require every region to meet greenhouse gas reduction standards. And so there is an incentive across every region of the state to do that. And it's critically important that we show that every region can do that, because the regional planning organizations are struggling, as you all know, to meet those requirements and to show that they've met them all the time. And it helps them push back against things like high carbon intensity projects and sprawl. So that was really my point, was that they in my mind, they go hand in hand, but really, really appreciate all the comments that others are having. I'm glad we have more time to talk about this. I have Secretary Castro Ramirez texted me that she has her hand up, and then Secretary Blumenfeld after that.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts here. First, the public comments, thank you all for joining us. I think you've given us a lot of information to consider. And so, of course, thankful for the additional time that we have to sort of, consider our decisions here in terms of the final guidelines. And I would offer that as since we have some additional time, and I think in my remarks at the beginning, I mentioned that, we've gone through this very sort of intentional process to take a look at the housing finance system and to come up with a value set, to guide the coordination and the investment of state funds as it relates to producing more affordable housing, particularly around areas of greatest need. I would, suggest, Chair, that maybe as a next step for, SGC staff, along with our HCD staff and also HFA's team to, and others, of course, to visit and to, maybe take a kind of deeper dive in terms of understanding the value sets and also the recommendations that we've advanced to the CITLAC team, because I do think that it has implications to some of the conversations that we're having. I was also thinking that, as we develop the allocation system for home key, we did look at a geographic, a regional approach. And in fact, I think we came up with 8 different regions. Of course, very different, right, program, but I think that there's some benefit in terms of sitting down with the HCD team to look at the outcome of using that approach. And I know that we've been collecting data, and so I think that would be really maybe helpful and informative as we make a decision. And then the last, actually the last 2 comments that I would make is I was very pleased to hear from those that joined us through public comment, support for AFFH, or, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I think that this is also an area that may need to be further defined in the guidelines that we issue. We had extensive conversation about what AFFH is, and how important it is for us to have a balanced approach, right? How important it is for us to develop a deeper affordability in well-resourced neighborhoods, but also how important it is for us to continue to invest in neighborhoods that are challenged by poverty or, systemic racism or redlining or, just like years and decades of disinvestment. And so I think we have to, when we think about AFFH, I think it's important for us to do both, right? To invest in well-resourced neighborhoods, but also to continue to invest in neighborhoods that are working to improve the housing access and quality within those neighborhoods. And then just the last point on the workforce development component, I think early on, Ryan mentioned, at a high level, the total number of dollars that have been awarded, the number of units that have been produced, and I think maybe even, dollars leveraged. I think as we continue to, hone in on the workforce development piece and employment, it would be really helpful to also quantify how many jobs are being created. What is the ripple effect of that investment? What's the kind of economic, and maybe we're already doing that. And if we are, just let me know. But I think that as we go more into the importance of the workforce development piece, maybe being able to pull that information out to be able to also sort of quantify, right, how these investments are leading to creating more job opportunities.
Thanks so much, Secretary Castro Ramirez. I have Secretary Blumenfeld and then Public Member Capretz.
Perfect. Nicole should definitely get the last word, and I appreciate that. First of all, Luis, you got your work cut out for you. A lot of different views, and what I'd like to say, Nicole, is one, completely get where you're coming from, and as someone who spent quite a lot of time in San Diego but doesn't live there, I get what you're trying to do, and especially as often a lone voice trying to push a strong climate agenda, which now has gained steam. Like, I think we all want to do everything we can to support San Diego. And you're right, you're coming from a different place where you don't have those historical investments. The frame that I'd ask us all to consider, which is twofold. One, the cap and trade revenues come from a market-based system that we all know allows for pollution in certain places. And a lot of those places are disadvantaged communities. We've talked about wanting to have a way of measuring that. Our wish has been granted, which is CalEnviroScreen is getting into its 4th version. It really does a great job of determining, and 535 and 1550 both refer to it as a way of just as quantifying and determining whether a community is disadvantaged. So our challenge is this, Nicole, just simply put, which is that San Diego has 2% of the state's disadvantaged communities, 2%. LA has 50%. So just relative to those, when you're thinking about level of disadvantage, and I often say this to our Bay Area friends who often complain to me about CalEnviroScreen, why aren't our communities on CalEnviroScreen? And I'm like, it's actually not something you want. This isn't a competition. We don't want to be in CalEnviroScreen, in the percentile of disadvantaged communities. So the good news is that San Diego has a very low percentage of disadvantaged communities. That's a good thing. So when we're trying to think about how to use money that comes from a market-based system that disadvantaged communities feel doubles down on their disadvantage, how do we allocate scarce resources on this particular program? Not how do we think about San Diego's important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or how do we make sure other funds that aren't specifically focused on making sure that we're really helping disadvantaged communities? But this is a very narrow discussion. So I don't want to broaden it to, do we care about San Diego and want to make sure that you get funding to help do your projects? The answer is 100% yes. But in the question of, does cap and trade revenue that's specifically targeted at reducing GHG and helping disadvantaged communities, do we want, and this is an open question, I know what my answer is, do we want to help the communities that are most disadvantaged first and most? And my answer to that question is yes. And we may just differ on that. But I just wanted to be a counterpoint to why the system exists in the way that it does. It is there because there's a system of ranking disadvantaged communities. And thankfully, San Diego only has 2% of the state's disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
Thanks. Just real quick, Nicole. Thanks, Secretary Bloomfield. Just wanted to say briefly, because we've heard it in public comment in previous meetings, just the approach CalEnviroScreen takes to defining disadvantaged communities isn't the same as the approach taken to defining low-income communities, vulnerable communities. There are many different approaches, and it's a very particular approach. So under that particular approach, absolutely hearing what you're saying, Secretary Bloomfield. Also just wanted to acknowledge Leadership Council's comments about the important role that equity and focus on disadvantaged communities plays in more inland parts of the state, which is where they really were coming from. But go ahead, Nicole, and I think you're the last word here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo exactly what you just said, Chair. I wasn't trying to suggest we should just get money because we're San Diego. I mean, what we heard from some of the speakers was that even the disadvantaged communities in San Diego cannot qualify if the GHG scoring criteria is used. So it's not just a function of us saying, hey, let's get money for more well-resourced communities just because. It's also that our disadvantaged communities, because like Chair Gordon said, it's not just CalEnviroScreen that's used by this program, right? I mean, Louise and Ryan can elaborate on that, but that isn't the criteria. My understanding is disadvantaged communities, which has a different definition. San Diego does have its fair share of disadvantaged communities. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm only using San Diego because that's where I'm based and that's who has directly reached out to me. So we heard from others, like Chair Gordon said, from inland communities, and you heard from And sorry, I don't know the name of the rural agency that spoke, and also, had challenge who were speaking up for regional allocations as well. It's not just San Diego. And I loved the secretary who said, "Oh my gosh," and I'm sorry, I have never met you in person, so I'm so sorry. I don't know.
Ramirez.
Yeah, who lifted up Project Home Key. What a beautiful program that has been, that we have seen every region in California sort of rise to the occasion and provide services and permanent shelter for the homeless and unhoused population. Like, I just think that's exactly what I'm trying to get to. Like, that there's so much value in that everyone in California feels like there's hope, there's a way forward. Especially when they're willing to take advantage of some state funds to do that. So anyhow, I just think I'm not just trying to get money for San Diego in and of itself. It's like we actually do have need, and those programs will be left out if we use the existing criteria. So thank you to Ryan and Louise, because I think you have done an extraordinary job of threading the needle and trying to find the, a practical way forward. And I'm grateful that you guys let me passionately try to make this case. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. I think I agree with the sentiment that everyone has made, that the staff has its work cut out for it. And also Secretary Castro Ramirez's suggestions about sort of some staff level conversations across the housing finance agencies to better understand decisions that are being made there to reconcile programs to align, because we know that these affordable housing projects, as one of the speakers said, are quite expensive and they require a lot of different funding in order to actually happen. So alignment of that funding is really important. And also your fair housing point, Secretary Castro Ramirez, and just really getting a better understanding of your principles that you talked about at the beginning. I think also, Louise, you had made the point about maybe coming back at the December meeting. It would be great if there was, the ability, that's a 4-week period, I think, between now and then. I, for one, would like to suggest an additional public comment period, maybe a shorter public comment period, like a 10-day period, just to allow for additional comments after this conversation, especially because the gas stove issue came up in this conversation and it hasn't been part of the conversation in the guidelines, and because of the change from the dynamic to the static scoring, which was a little bit more recent. So I'd like to suggest an additional public comment period, and then just see if you can give us some sense of a timeline. You can come back to us with a final decision, but would love to hear some sense of what you're thinking.
Yeah, and I just want to make one clarifying point, which is that we do use, for disadvantaged communities, like all GGRF programs, we use Cal EnviroScreen to do that definition, and then the 1550 low income. We use all the same definitions that are consistent across all programs, just going back to the conversation ahead of that. So sorry, I think we are happy to, and Ryan, I can work with Ryan and the AHSC team and with the CARB staff and HCD folks who have been really partnering with us on this, to revisit, I think, thinking through some things that we've heard specifically on moved back away to a score threshold, so back into that. I call it the relative space, but away from the metric tons into that. I think the gas stoves is another. We would like to just hear if that's going to be especially disruptive. We did some preliminary reconnaissance, and it sounded like it would not. And so, but I think having an opportunity for some comment on that would be helpful. And then I think also, I think the affirmatively furthering fair housing is also a really important conversation for us to have. I think, and one that continues to be one that trying to figure out how to strike that balance is a really important topic. And I think one we can certainly look and integrate some of the more of the principles language into the document. And then I think it may be a longer term issue for us to try to figure out the best way to weave our statutory direction on investment in disadvantaged communities with the affirmatively furthering fair housing. But I don't think they're incompatible. I actually think we can make them work together. And that's probably, that's kind of our job.
Thank you. That is great. Thanks, Louise, for that. So, so we'll expect sort of an updated specific schedule from you, which you'll also go to the public, obviously, soon. And all those considerations we just mentioned, I think, are really important. So thank you. This has been a long meeting. I am going to close out this item. We have one more item before we close the meeting. It's just the general public comment. There is at least one person who wanted to comment during the HSC item and wasn't able to. So I just want to make sure we get that comment at least before we end. Is everyone okay with us moving to that final public comment? Lots and lots of discussion will be had on this with all of us and with our key staff. So really looking forward to that. And one request I would make, Louise, is a number of the people who commented referred to letters that they'd written to staff. I think it would be really helpful to share those across the council and key staff so that we can see what those guys, so we can actually digest the comments in a little bit longer form and see where people are what people's concerns are. Are you able to share those with folks?
Yes, we can put together a SharePoint site, and we have Ryan and team make an excellent tracker that you can kind of look at different topics. And yes,
that would be really helpful, I know, to me. So I'm just going to speak for everyone else. All right, Sandra.
Yes, so now we're in agenda item number 7, which is public comment on general items not on the agenda. However, I heard from somebody who was unable to connect to the Zoom earlier and was hoping to make public comment now. That person is Ann Wilson. Ann, if you're still with us, can you raise your hand and we'll unmute your microphone?
Thank you. I am from San Diego, although I work for a development company, Chelsea Investment, and we develop affordable housing all over the state. And with our other nonprofit partners, we've been involved in, I think, 3 or 4 AHSC awards. And I really wanted to say I appreciated the conversation and the comments the council made. You're trying to balance a lot of things. I think you've heard from San Diego. I stand with the people who spoke before me, so I won't take up more time. But we're just very concerned about whether the 20% geographic set aside is sufficient to really try to make a dent in some of the greenhouse gas and some of the connection between housing and mitigations in other areas of the state. Thank you for your time. I'm not going to repeat what other people have said.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks for staying on and making that comment. Appreciate that. Do we have anyone else who would like to make a public comment? And if so, please raise your hand at this moment. Those 72 people who have weathered this meeting and are still here, really impressive. You guys are all good public participants, good civic participation.
I'm not seeing any additional hands. Kate.
Okay. Do folks on the council feel like we have enough clarity, that we've given enough clarity to staff on
It looks like Chair Gordon might be frozen at this time.
Uh-oh. She's probably answering all of the big questions for us. That's really too bad.
Somewhat anticlimactic. What do we do in this case, Doug?
Louise, it sounded like she was asking whether anybody else wanted to further clarify, the conversation.
Yeah.
By way of giving you direction here in coming weeks.
And I can tell you guys what I have as next steps, which is first we will consolidate, make available all the public comment letters and comment tracker for folks who want to dig in on that. I will confer back with Ryan and team to, okay, she said, I think she's got a problem. So Mike, you're now in charge. So all you have to do is adjourn the meeting once, if this is sufficient, I think, which is, so then we'll come up with a calendar of sort of especially with the holiday next week, how we can have a meaningful opportunity for folks to engage in some of the shifts. And so thinking through the comments we heard today and reflecting those in a way that can be commented on by the public. And that specifically being around going back to the score-based type of threshold, as well as the gas stoves piece of a recommendation to disallow gas stoves in the living spaces. And so those are the three big items. Obviously, all of those have a lot of components to them in terms of conferring with all of our partners. But we'll keep you all in the loop as we come up with a calendar and schedule for those next steps, which I anticipate we can do over the next few days.
Louise, this is David. Quick question. Is our next meeting December, January, or February?
We have a meeting 1 month from today, December 17th.
Thank you.
And I just got a text, quick question too, Louise, for clarification. So do you intend to have another round of public comment? Or you're going to weigh that or consider that, or?
I think we would like to probably make available a shorter, not a full 30 days, but we, figure out what makes sense and provide an opportunity for comment and engagement.
Okay, because someone on the call just texted me and asked me to ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, is that it? I don't have the ability to see raised hands or anything like that, so.
Let's see.
Vice Chair, there are no hands raised, no
Great.
additional public comment, no panelist hands raised either.
Sounds like we are ready for adjournment. Thanks again to the members of the council for taking the time for this lengthy meeting. Thank you to the members of the public for participating. Really appreciate your comments, and thanks as always to the SGC staff for the outstanding work that you do. Everybody have a great holiday season, and we'll see you next month. So with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.